Hey everybody, this is Carlos Ocelot, founder and CEO of G2 Esports, former professional gamer, and wonderful bodybuilder, as you may have known. Of course, you know me for that, pretty sure. And you're watching Dancan's channel. Thorin, my man. Enjoy.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Elitists United, and being as it's, I notice people call it the off-season, but it is in a way, but it's also kind of like people are training for the next season. It's really just the time between the two splits when we would have had MSI, but no MSI RIP. So what we thought we'd do is do an episode where we look at some of the off-season, if it is indeed that, moves that have gone on, transfers between teams, rumoured ones that might happen. Obviously, I'm sure one thing that people will be interested to know if they've been following the last LEC splits is the people who are coming up from the National Leagues level who are going to join the league, because actually thus far, for the last year and a half, they've been pretty impactful on the outcomes of the leagues. Many of them have made playoffs, have transformed the fortunes of some of the teams. So our guest for this one is going to be Peter Dunne, who, what is your actual official title within the Mad Lions organization, Peter? What is your title?
I'm head coach of Mad Lions League of Legends. Let's call it League of Legends division. So I'm not quite a general manager, but I'm not quite what most people would call a head coach. I'm what people would call a head coach in career, I guess.
Do you kind of play a bit of the role of the general manager, though? It was intimated to me that you were the person, for example, who was in charge of some of the moves that Mad Lions made in this last off-season, getting those players. Do you kind of play that role functionally?
I do a lot of scouting. I do a lot of coaching, mainly with the main team this year, but I split my time between main team and academy last year, and just make sure everything runs well day to day on the performance side.
Okay. Right, let's jump into some of these moves then, Veteran. So obviously there's a million we can do here because there's a lot that are rumors. Let's just do some of the official ones first, the ones that people know are actually happening. So one of the teams that has made pretty big changes actually is Vitality, who, if anyone's listening and they don't ever watch this show, they're going to think, well, that's obvious. Like, they were the worst team, they were garbage. But the reason why that actually surprises me is if you look at the moves that they'd already made during the split, bringing in Steelback seemed to turn the team around. They obviously never even had Milica or Milicea, or however you say his name, the mid laner. So to me, I didn't even view that as like a proper experiment. Like, how can I know how good the team's going to be without, in theory, the star mid laner? So to actually see these moves where Steelback is already out and your boy Lavrov is in, who people will have heard referenced many times before, but then also bizarrely to me, the jungle move, right? Because Nij or whatever his name is comes in replacing Skins. But again, I have a hard time judging him because he didn't have his real mid laner. So where do you come down initially on these moves, Veteran?
So first of all, like the overall controversy of why is he taking NG when, for example, Tinks had a really good performance and he's not being picked up by them. I actually still do approve, if you are going to move people in, that you do somewhat prioritize moving them up from within the org, and NG was on their academy team. The way that they have communicated about this, it seems like they haven't necessarily given up on Schemes, but they think Schemes might benefit from some time off of the main roster. I mean, let's be real, the last split was basically a one big long traumatic experience for him. Like, imagine going in on your first split and the roster is like that fucked, right? And that's the first thing anyone sees from you is your performances on this roster that completely lacks direction because it was completely thrown off by a bunch of legal issues that have nothing to do with you, you know? So the way a lot of people have been talking about it, it seems like Schemes is going to get like time off on the acad thing, but it's not necessarily that NG is just going to straight start for them. I do think Schemes is worse than NG. I've never seen anything to indicate that NG is better than Schemes. NG, people might remember from his time on Fnatic Rising last year, where he was very strong at making picks in mid to late game, which gave that team a lot of comeback potential, which they needed because NG would fall behind massively in early game because he had no clue how to play it. Whereas Schemes was at least very, very good around neutral objective contests on early and very good at getting the team around that. So I do think Schemes is still better than NG in that regard. On the support thing, you've got, I love Lavrov. I'm so glad he's getting an opportunity. I'm not entirely sure about moving him there when you already have Steelback, and people keep citing that, you know, the LFL needs free French minimum and all of this stuff, but it's like it's a very confusing move to me.
No team would sacrifice their LEC performance for
yes, exactly.
regional leagues, right? But I think there's an important point here, right? Which is that firstly, there's been a lot of hype about Tinks coming off from this EU Masters. And to be clear, Tinks was the best player at the EU Masters. No question. He was the best player at the EU Masters. Now, people may forget this, but But Xinged was arguably, it was between Xinged and Shadow, was arguably the best jungler at EU Masters the previous split. He had an exceptionally strong EU Masters, and he was put in a very unfortunate position in Vitality. But Vitality have said publicly that they did a lot of tests with lots of players. I think Duke did an AMA when they announced their roster, explaining the situation. They've decided that what NG offers, that they didn't. It's very interesting reading these kind of posts because you always have to read between the lines, right?
Of
It's
course,
like
yeah.
I remember a show that you and Thorin Veteran had where Young Buck came on and Young Buck said we don't have Fnatic don't have a system, right?
Yes.
I mean, not the
While almost winking at the camera visibly. Yeah.
but I mean, he's not lying. Like Fnatic
Oh,
don't
sure.
have a system, but Young Buck as a head coach definitely has a system, right?
Of
Like
course.
every team that Young Buck coaches has specific things that they like to do, right? So he's not lying, right? Like he told her truth. Fnatic don't have a system. I have a system, right? But anyway, but if you read between the lines of what was in that announcement, right? They talked a lot in depth of what Xinged had offered as a player. You know, they talked about his mechanical skill, they offered his potential for an improvement, and they didn't talk about any of these things for NG. Now maybe after seeing the show, they're going to go and release a thing saying, "Oh, you know, we forgot to mention all of these additional traits." But the key thing that they did highlight for NG is that he had a strong voice. He was a good shot caller, and he provided leadership. Right, so maybe that they felt that the team lacked a bit of leadership. I think it would be unreasonable to expect somebody like Lavrov to come in and provide that leadership immediately, right? If they were lacking it from last season, and therefore NG is somebody who they brought up through the organization and they think provides these traits, right? Like it's not League of Legends is not just about having the 5, best mechanical players, right? Sometimes if you have really strong mechanical players, you need that voice. For lack of a better word, that slave driver, to force the players to
Sure.
perform to their best level, the person with the high motivation, and maybe that's what NG offers. So it's an interesting move. NG didn't have a very good split in LFL last season, but he had the same problems that Vitality and the main team had because Yoppa, who was his top laner in LPL, had the same visa issues that Milica did.
Yes.
And I mean, he performed perfectly adequately when he was playing on. It was Fnatic, right? He was on Fnatic last season. He performed perfectly adequately on Fnatic. I mean, he wouldn't have been my personal first choice, but Vitality have more information that we don't have. So maybe that's why they felt to make that trade. I feel a bit sad for Xinged. I hope he has an opportunity to show his skills later on, either on Vitality or on another team. The guy's a very confident, aggressive, proactive jungler and wasn't allowed to show it in LEC and was forced to on a style that he wasn't comfortable playing. Very obviously wasn't comfortable playing. So he maybe a lot of just people who watch LEC and don't watch regional leagues maybe missed out on seeing Xinged at his best, but he's definitely one who will play in LEC again one day. I would be shocked if he didn't.
So in summary, if people want to know what he's like outside of this clusterfuck scenario, that basically is the nightmare for a rookie to walk into, just basically go and watch last year's EU Masters.
Yeah, I mean, he was very, very good at EU Masters. If I say that he was the best jungler at EU Masters, I think Shadow might have a word for me.
I mean, he definitely wasn't better than Shadow. I would also argue that Dan performed better than him previously, but Dan wasn't at that EU Masters anyway. Sure. So,
but I mean, like, there was no question that the top 2 people were Shadow and Xinged, and obviously we recruited Shadow, right? So we think Shadow was the best. But he showed a lot of promise.
He did
in that one.
I think you're right when you talk about the kind of leadership role that they say, because normally when we hear that like this player that is objectively worse than like another player, like NG versus Xinged here, we do often hear the idea that they are.
Be careful here about saying he's objectively worse. We don't know, like we don't have all the information here.
The way that he plays in game, jungle itself is worse. Okay, I will gladly go out and just say that, Peter. Like, even if okay, Peter, you're saying that. Okay, I'm sorry, but NG was also in that tournament where Xinged and Shadow were, and you definitely didn't bring up NG's name there. So
NG is a higher variance jungler than Xinged. Right? So
I will agree with
that. I mean, and that, people say, oh, he's high variance, that's a bad thing. No, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes you want a high variance player on your team. Like Whippo is the perfect example of a high variance player. And like the number of games that he's won for Fnatic is extremely high, right? You can't have. I mean, so to bring it back
on the flip side, there are games that Whipper has undoubtedly lost, and there are games that NG has undoubtedly lost. Whereas you can never really have put the blame for Vitality's losses on Xinged. Like the thing I wanted to say wasn't that to restate that I think Xinged is better than NG. What I wanted to say is that here I don't actually take the leadership thing as an excuse. Because NG has actually had that. On Fnatic Rising, for example, we know he's historically being a very prominent voice in all the teams that he's been on. My question then would be that if you know you're going to need this kind of leadership voice on your current roster setup, why do you trade Steelback out at all? You're right that we can't expect Labrov to do that based on the fact that he of his age and the fact that he's a rookie. But Steelback doesn't have either of those two qualities. Labrov historically has never been a shot caller on any of his teams. Steelback historically, even as an AD carry, has been the primary shot caller on all of his teams, and arguably the second best team at that same tournament that Scheme's Shadow were both at was LDLC, who were headed by Steelback in a massive game-changing way. And Steelback's performances in last split were actually really fucking good. I don't understand why you would remove him if you knew you were going to have this kind of leadership vacuum. I'm happy for Labrov, but I'm unsure about that decision.
I mean, I think it's worth saying, right? So when we talk about Steelback as somebody who is a very so Steelback is a good player. Okay, let's put that to one side. Steelback is one of the top supports at ERL level, but the style of play that Steelback likes to play is a hard roaming, heavy roaming style, right? Like I mean, he showed that at LEC. Like even if you only watch LEC, like you can see this, right? Yeah. The problem with this is that at ERL level, you are often punished much less for roaming, and Comp and Steelback was one of the strongest 2v2 laning bot lanes in the entire ERLs for like a year, right? So he was able to play his roaming style. Steelback is one of those players who, if you have a lead, if he has a laning lead, he can just win the game for you off that, right? But the thing about Steelback as an individual support, as a 2v2 laning support, is that he is somebody who, at the LEC level, so far has not shown that he can consistently win the 2v2. And at LEC, if you roam without winning the bot 2v2 very hard, you'll be punished much harder than at a regional level, right? Now, I'm not saying Steelback can never become that player, but it means that his style of play is much weaker at LEC level until he can be with an AD carry who can consistently win lane. Maybe that player could have been comped, right? Together, but they didn't show it last split, right? So
I will say that I actually do disagree with you that he didn't show it last split. I think that he won so many 2v2 lanes for them, admittedly versus lower tier teams, but they never really ended up fielding Steelback versus a lot of the upper tier teams anyway. When he doesn't end up hard winning 2v2, it's not like he adopts a high variance roam style, right? That's why they lost to Big, because Big had the only bot lane that could directly challenge them in the 2v2 setup. So if Big were given the counter pick matchup, they would lock them in lane, and Steelback wasn't going to make high variance plays off that. So it's not like when Steelback does roam, he does it in punishable scenarios. I do think that we saw him win the 2v2 a lot. I do think we saw Steelback win games not just from early roaming. The SK game, where his whole map basically ran it down early, is a big reminder of that. He basically won that mechanically in the free man mid section in mid to late game mechanically. So he has shown that he's a lot more than just like a giga roamer.
I don't have the information behind the scenes, to be clear, but what I do know about Duke is a very strategic coach, right? Like he never does something just on a whim, right? He always has like a large amount of logic, which he's happy to go into with you in a lot of detail. A lot of detail, right? So maybe the fact that Steelback wasn't being played against these teams with strong 2v2s was because they didn't believe that Vitality could win the 2v2 bot. I mean, you mentioned that he wasn't given the opportunity. Yeah, fair, but we don't know how scrims were going, right? So maybe he offered so much when he was winning that they wanted to play him against these weaker teams, but they didn't dare to play him against stronger teams because his 2v2 wasn't that strong. That's just hypothetical. I don't know. We didn't scrim Vitality that much, so
Yeah, and we also didn't see him being a weak 2v2 player. I think it's just kind of conjecture to say that he's a weak 2v2 player. I think that would be the kind of thing you'd have to be seeing a lot in scrims for you not to decide to start him. But I'm definitely not going to try to condemn Steelback here as being a bad 2v2 player because we just haven't seen that at all.
Yeah. Right. What about give us a prediction or a projection for this team now? So first of all, it's obviously contingent on the idea that they're going to have the middle laner they didn't have. So there's that. But in the world where they actually get this real lineup, for example, can we immediately say they won't be the worst team in LEC? Is that already a scenario you're willing to commit to?
Yes.
I think I need to see more of what SK are doing because I do want to say that loads of teams are making changes right now, right? Okay. So it's not as simple as putting them in the pantheon of last time's rosters. Misfits have stepped up, SK may be stepping up.
But even that in itself implies you don't just see this it's not an immediate playoff team off this lineup, right?
Yeah, I don't see it as an immediate playoff team. I worry that they have sacrificed an exceptional amount of talent that they had in one particular regard for this leadership voice, and I think it will end up mattering because Lavrov has never been one of these map dominant support players. I think he's very mechanically strong. I think that he has shown prowess in mid-roam timings at some points, but he's nowhere near on Steelback's level in this regard. So then it will be up to NG to control the map, and he historically hasn't been very good at that. So I actually do see a jungle support failing. I'm not calling either of these jungle support players bad, but I do see a mismatch here that actually does make me worried for this roster. On the upside, they do have Melitza here. And he's a very, very strong laning mid laner. And he's also very vocal on what he needs in that mid lane as well. So there might be a lot more tools for NG to play around in that regard, like Melitza did in the old Giants gaming roster. So maybe that's an area where they could get a bunch of wins off. But then I'm modeling this as similar to Misfits last split, where they'll have that I can see an avenue where they have a strategy that could work out, but that will taper off. And in summer, it's a lot more punishing than in spring. So I wouldn't even say that they could maybe run that to playoffs before it tapers off.
It's worth saying, though, that the LEC has been completely shaken up in this offseason. I mean, there's 6 of the teams have made changes. If we include G2, switching their AD carry and mid back, but I've basically never seen so many teams making changes in between spring and summer. Yes. So in a league that's been overhauled as much as this, a lot of things have been shaken up. Generally, I prefer in this kind of a situation that you take a gamble, right? EU gets to send 4 teams to Worlds. And last split didn't work out so well, so go and shake things up. Who knows? And yeah, we'll have to see how Vitality do. I think Vitality had what are those weights called? They had a lot of weights dragging them down into the quicksand last split, and neither of those weights are going to be there this split. So maybe they'll come out of the experience stronger. So
what about then, before we move on from Vitality, for people who've never watched Melitza play, what should they expect from him? Obviously people know how good Kabashard can be. Are they going to have one of the better solo lane setups in the game?
So in Spain, Melitza was a high resource, high output player, right? He was a player that demanded that you played around him, but he would help you. He would dominate people at ERL level in the split push. Okay. Now, and Razork, who was his jungler, who's now, of course, on Misfits. And one of the reasons why Razork was underrated, I think, coming into the LEC split, although it's worth saying that Misfits, and Amazing in particular, did a fantastic job improving Razork's play. One of the reasons he came in so underrated into LEC was because people just said, this is a player who only counts for Melitza. He's only got one play in his playbook. And as a result, Melitza looked a lot better. It's worth saying that Melitza looked like one of the top mid laners in Europe at ERL level last year. The problem is that the year before was a bumping year for mid lane talent moving up from ERLs to LECs, right? So he's untested against people like Nemesis, against people like Humanoid, against people like Larson, right? These are players. I've forgotten one. Abadage was the other one, right? Okay. These were all players who were removed from the pool, and he was the person who came in and kind of filled that gap.
Right.
Doesn't mean he can't compete with them, but he more than anybody else has something to prove this split. Because Vitality sacrificed their spring split for him, basically, waiting for him to come, and now it's time for him to pay them back.
Go on. Sorry.
For him to pay them back and prove that he was worth the sacrifice.
So what I will add is that Melitza actually does have a history against all the mid laners that you just named. In the initial split where Origen were participating in EU Masters, Melitza was on that famous team that actually defeated them in group stage, playing Scion mid and Rise and all of this stuff versus Foggins and Nivea, etc. Nemesis in that tournament, last one's in that tournament. You actually have seen him have really strong performances really early on in his career. He was just in a minor ERL league. So it's very difficult to consistently like transfer from there until he moved into the Spanish league, right? But yeah, I will say he has had a history of success against these guys. I do think I'm curious to see how personality-wise this kind of works out, because he's being a very demanding mid laner in the past, and NG has historically been a very demanding jungler as well. So it will be interesting to see which one of them kind of like buckles here. When it was going to be Schemes and Steelback, I figured this could be absolutely perfect, because Schemes is the kind of guy who will default to the needs of his laners and the needs of what his laners call out. And Steelback is very good at retaining map control around midsection, and even he's the only guy that finds roam towards topside. So having Cabochard plus Melitza plus that kind of jungle support pairing, I really loved, which is part of my worries here, because I feel like they had a winning formula and they kind of like gave it up. I'll be very curious after the season ends to hear what their reasoning was with that. I think we'll see Schemes back soon.
Actually, there is one other minor detail to take care of with the Vitality house cleaning before we go on, which is Veteran. This is going to be the intervention. It's going to be a very quick one that I've already had with LS previously, right? Don't ever bother bringing up Selfie's name or Corey or whatever he wants to go by. Don't ever mention him again in any context ever on any of these shows. It was literally 6 years ago this motherfucker was a promising player. Last time he was actually a relevant fucking talent in Europe, Loco Doco was still a championship level coach. Fucking like Piglet was still on SK Telecom. Like Westerners had never been to the final of Worlds. Like there's a Veteran. This guy is a fucking bomb. He is 23 years old. He is a never was, not a one day might be. Like he has had a million chances. Now he's had like entire splits. It's not that he was just put in that situation where he was just coming in as a sub and all shit. Like this motherfucker pissed away his talent on all those benches, on all those bad moves, whatever it is he's done. So listen, I had a lot of time for him, but I don't give you 7 years, mate. You don't get 7 years of my time.
I didn't even mention. Why am I?
Because you always fucking have a soft spot for this guy, and it has to just be said. The guy is done. He is. It's over. It's over.
I have a soft spot for him, but
put him, Promiscue, and a bunch of the other ones in a boat. Put it in the middle of the Atlantic and sink the fucking boat. Let's move on. We need to move on.
So you're saying that you don't agree? The season 1 championship was a legitimate world championship.
I believe my feelings are very well known on that one, Peter.
I mean, all I can say is that the majority of people I've spoken to in the Chinese scene didn't think it was legitimate either.
Wow, I wonder why.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, so.
But anyway,
I don't know. I don't know what I did to. I don't know what Selfie did to deserve that. Like,
to be clear, he wasn't. I don't like to flame people, but like he really wasn't very good.
No,
he didn't perform well. No, I mean he's far from like when he was on Shulker. I will say that I thought he had a ton of potential. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not going to try to defend the performances that he had on Vitality. I thought he performed pretty badly. I've also never brought up Selfie as being like a top 10 EU mid laner in any time in the last year or two. So I'm not quite sure why I'm being put on the spot here, but I can tell whatever.
Well, then we're all in agreement, aren't we? So let's all just agree. Let's put our fucking tankards together.
Guy,
fuck Selfie, and then we move on with our lives. Right, there we go.
Hell.
So there we go. That's all. I mean, here's the thing. He's going to be on a new fad diet called strictly playing in the RLs for the rest of his career. So, like. Yeah, that's a good joke. Whatever. Anyway, let's move on from that. Let's skip on.
He's going to have all sorts of support, isn't he? Okay,
He said that to me like every year, by the way, that he's going to do that. I just want to say that, and it never ends up happening.
Right, a team we can move to now is one where we've actually already discussed these moves on a past episode before they were confirmed. So I'll actually get Peter's thoughts on this first, which is that XL made the move of bringing in Cries to be the top laner, and Special returns to the team after his time in the wilderness to be the mid laner. Now, obviously, XL was a team already, Peter, who were like, I think there was something like one game maybe from playoffs. Like, I think they might have had to win 2 because it was like a tiebreaker scenario or something. So with the last lineup, they weren't that far from a playoff team. What do you think with these moves? What do you expect for XL?
Interesting stat on XL. XL were 0-2 against every playoff team except us, and 2-0 against every non-playoff team and us, and Mad Lions.
Definition of a brink playoff team. Yeah, there you go.
So Mickey has been criticized as a player who is very inconsistent, but he always flipped heads, or 3 heads, or however many heads you need to flip.
I never criticized him.
High quality to get the high quality Mickey performance. It was always against Mad Lions or Splice. Like every single time, Mickey performed well. Like all the highlight videos are of him, like against Humanoid, against Xerxes, against Shadow, like all of them, right? So this is a great move for us. We're really happy now. But as a serious point, okay, I think the interesting thing about this XL move is something actually that we've experienced on Mad Lions. So I'm just going to go on a bit of a tangent for here. So Thorin, I noticed you do another show with Monty, which is like about esports.
They've only just started Essential Esports. Yeah,
Essential Esports, and they had Quick Shot on for the first episode. It's a fantastic show. Everyone should go and watch it. But the interesting thing that Quick Shot talked about is how when LEC is doing production, they like to focus on the storylines of 1 or 2 players on the team and build sort of this narrative around individual names that people can recognize.
Sure.
Okay. So why does this matter? The reason why this matters is that often, if you are one of those players who is not being covered and you are receiving a lot of criticism, or you often don't get the opportunity to speak in your defense. Okay, so let's talk about this from the Mad Lions experience. So I want to talk a little bit about Arome, because I know Arome is somebody who has been criticized a lot in the public, and it's worth talking about Arome's role in Mad Lions, and I'll bring it back to XL later. So when you build a rookie roster, often you have the disadvantage. So you've seen a lot of rookies have success in LEC display. You've seen rookies have success historically in Europe, right? But generally, the reasons that rookie rosters have been successful is often you bring a lot of mechanical excellence. You bring a lot of fire, willingness to improve, willingness to sacrifice in order to improve. But often people who are brought into the LEC or EU LCS as rookies lack sort of the pages in their playbook that a team such as G2 has. Okay, and often the way that these teams compensate for this is that they focus on 1 or 2 particular styles of play that they can do it and refine them to a very high level.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why you often see rookie rosters do really, really well, and sometimes you'll see them fall off. Right. It's because you have 1 or 2 pages in your playbook. You're really, really good at these kind of things. But then people begin to work out your playbook, and then you begin to suffer. This is obviously a challenge Mad Lions has to overcome going into next split. We believe we can, but obviously it's a challenge that we know exists. Now, who is Arome as a player? Arome was somebody who was originally an AD carry. He's somebody who actually we used in scrims at Worlds, right? When Splice went to Worlds, Humanoid was sick before the play-ins. He didn't scrim much before play-ins, and because he was very, very sick, and we used Arome against mid lane for mid lane scrims. The only teams who were there were the NA teams who were boot camping in Europe, and the wildcard teams who were there. He performed exceptionally well.
Is he actually like an off-role mid laner? Does he play the role ever, or was this purely just to fill in?
This was purely to fill in, but he did very, very well, including against NA teams. I'm not going to call out any NA mid laners, but Arome, who is somebody, would be a top 3, based on his scrim performance, would be a top 3 mid laner in NA. Okay? And I think Bjergsen is a top 2 mid laner in NA. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to say anything, anything more.
Okay.
Froggen is obviously number 1 for him.
Yeah, I assume that one without saying.
Based on his performance. Okay, but there's a follow-up to this. Okay, so as a result of how he was doing in those games, we began to use him sometimes as scrims. We had Vizitrachi as our top laner last year, but Vizitrachi was somebody who Vizichachis has a history in playing what do you call them? Real-time strategy games. He's like the faker of Age of Mythology. He's like a legend at that game. Like he's at chess, he's an insane chess player. But the Vizichachis' approach to scrims was, I need to test my limits as much as I can so I can learn these things to be on stage. But if you need to learn things such as splice mid-game, you need to improve your splice mid-game. Sometimes you don't need somebody to test these things all of the time, test these limits all of the time. And you need somebody who's a bit more consistent, who can play strong. You know, if you invest a lot of resources into somebody who can play strong side, then you want them to be consistent in how they carry the game. Okay, and Arome did those things exceptionally well at Worlds, and that's one of the reasons why we were really, really looking forward to bringing in Arome going into this year. Obviously, we weren't going to drop Chachi at Worlds, to be clear, right? It's just that we use Arome in scrims, and he performed very, very well as a strong side player who was consistent to help us improve our mid game. Okay, performed really, really well against Asian top laners as a strong side player. Okay, so brings into Mad Lions in 2020. This is a team where we have Kazi, it's a team where we have Kaiser, and it's a team that we have Shadow. All super aggressive players. Kazi and Kaiser really want to fight you 2v2 to the death all the time. And in order to, but obviously in a team like this, somebody has to sacrifice, right? And in order that Shadow, Kazi, and Kaiser could play their comfortable game, Arome, who is not a weak side player, Arome, AD carry early in his career, strong side top laner, like for a lot of his time in ERLs, took on the opportunity, took on the responsibility to play weak side, sacrificed himself so that the people who were new into the Splice/Mad Lions organization could play their comfort games so that they could adjust quickly to life in the LEC. Okay? Now, because of the sacrifice, he wasn't acknowledged as one of the top two people, and like the coverage focus heavily on Kazi, focus heavily on Kaiser. Two fantastic players, deserve all the praise that they get, right? But it means that the amount of criticism that he was never given a platform to be able to come and defend himself. And if you look at how Arome played in playoffs against G2, one of the most of our 3-2 series win against G2 was Arome had a fantastic series. Like Arome was better than Wonder in that series as a rookie over 5 games. He had one bad game, but Wonder had mix it. But and that was that everybody was saying G2 is going to crush Mad Lions because Arome is going to get smashed 1v1 by Wonder. And that didn't happen, and that's one of the reasons why we were able to win the series. But you look at the post-game threads and people are saying, oh, this Mad Lions team would be insane. This is just after we beaten G2. If only they could replace Arome for somebody else. Okay? And after he just had arguably the defining series of his career. Okay? So why does this matter for Excel? Patrick is a high resource AD carry, right? He's one of those players, a bit like Milika. You give him the resources, he will carry for you. Fantastic player. I'm not saying Patrick is a bad player. However, if you look at Special and you look at Kryze at the ERL level, these are both players, again, high resource players, mechanical players, will lead the game for you. If you give them resources, they will carry the game for you. Kryze, fantastic player. He was one of those players who we would have looked at. Like Mad Lions, look at a lot of talented young players, and Kryze was right on the top of our list for a long time, and Excel got him. Good job, Excel. But one of Special or Kryze is going to have to sacrifice themselves next split in order for this roster to work. You can't have 3 high resource carries, and that person is not going to get covered. Is going to receive a ton of criticism from the community, and it's a case of how Excel are able to manage that, because these kind of things can massively affect the confidence of a player. These kind of things can damage a player in the long term, permanently if you're not careful. And this is something which, if the Excel roster wants to work, and Young Buck's a fantastic coach, I'm sure he can make it work. One of those two players is going to have to sacrifice and is going to have to play a style of play that they are not comfortable playing, a lower resource style of play. And this is one of the reasons why I was surprised that they chose to have Kryze and Special and bring them up at the same time. I'm really fascinated to see how it works. I hope that Excel go out of their way to protect these players, because unfortunately the bar has been set really high for rookies, and kind of if you don't perform really, really well immediately now as a rookie, people already looking at the bright new thing for BU Master saying, oh, why don't you go and kick Skeens out already and bring in Tinks, okay, or something like this. And I worry because Special's already had one chance at LEC. I don't think he should have been dropped back in the day, but he was dropped, right? He wasn't given the chance to say his side of the story. And if Special is that guy who is forced to sacrifice, and Special is the guy who is going to take all of that criticism on board, people are going to go out of their way and they're going to go and say, oh, I knew Special was bad all along. he already had one chance. He's now had his second chance without realizing that he's having to sacrifice to make the team work. If it's Kreis who's having to sacrifice and play his non-conventional style, then people will say, "Oh, who's this random guy? He didn't even play in last EU Masters, or somebody else should have been brought in, like Xinged or something like this." And that kind of thing is really, really hard for a rookie. So I think these players are really talented. They're both really talented. The roster's really interesting, but it's how they manage the narratives outside of the game. So that's how I feel about the Excel roster.
I completely disagree with your read on Excel. The problem with Excel wasn't necessarily that Expect was like bad at playing weak side, or that they had an issue with Patrick playing weak side. Patrick was playing weak side for the majority of Excel's time in the LEC. It's just that their top laner would only play Renekton. He, for some weird reason, he decided to drop Gangplank halfway through the split, and then this guy went from being a Renekton Rumble 2 trick to just no. There were multiple games where the draft was really easy for them to insert Gangplank, and they just ended up going Renekton without a Gangplank ban being levied versus them. There were so many games like this.
That was after Blade of Ruin King got buffed, so Renekton became really, really powerful. Like that's why the transition happened, because Renekton used to be a champion which got outscaled in like 15 to 20 minutes.
Had Youngbuck, we even had Youngbuck on the show about this, and he agreed that there were those instances Gangplank should have been the priority instead of Renekton.
But this is
pigeonholed here. Yeah, but I'm just saying that your read is that they're going to have to choose between playing around top side or around bot side. First off, I actually disagree with the idea that you have to completely abandon one side to play weak side, which seems to be the implication here.
No, that's the one I'm saying.
And a good enough jungler obviously can set waves properly such that they can play heavy around one side for acceleration plays, with the other side being perfectly safe. Cadril is obviously the jungler to do that. The idea that is provably but Patrick spent the whole split being played away from, because they play heavily for Expect.
I'm not talking about early game jungle attention. I'm talking about side lane wave pressure. Like special, except when he's playing Zoe, is generally somebody who has excelled on side lane champions, as is Kreis, right?
No, I disagree with that. No, Special's a Syndra player. So Special's best champion is Syndra. Special's fierce champion is Syndra.
I mean, like he plays a really good Akali, he plays a really good Irelia, he plays really good Cassiopeia. Yeah, sure. I mean, he can play Syndra as well, right? I'm not saying that they can never find a way to play around these players, right? But what I'm saying is that the majority of Specials champion pool and definitely Kreis, Kreis has never been a tank player, and I mean, I'm not saying he can't play, but Kreis is definitely he's a hard carry player, right?
Yeah.
And if there's a situation where there is a side lane in the mid game that one of those two players can farm, that decision is going to have to be made, and it's going to have to be made outside of the game. And both of these players are players who are used to being allowed to pick up all the side lane farm on their ERL teams. And this doesn't mean they can't function, but it means they're going to be out of their comfort zone. And I'm fascinated to see how Excel handle it. I think they've picked up two really, really good rookie players.
Again.
But okay, then.
Yeah, because we can have a simple 1-3-1 situation where obviously, yes, they will prioritize certain sections of farm on them, but you don't prioritize farm specifically in 1-3-1 situations unless you're playing a heavy scaling defensive 1-3-1 setup. What they will be prioritizing is strong side v weak side relative to teleport on Kreis, and Kreis has played with that beautifully on Unicorns of Love already. That doesn't mean he has to move away from stuff like Jax or move away from stuff like, well, Vladimir is actually really good in that situation anyway, and Rise is still quite good in that situation regardless. So it's not like he even has to move necessarily away from his champion pool. I disagree that the decisions that they'll have to make in mid to late game scenarios are poor for that. I also think Special delivers something Mickey didn't. Like you mean the bit about like Mickey having like highlight reels versus you guys, but for example, his like the wards to end all wards, where Mickey ends up getting a double kill off on you guys, he doesn't actually translate that into map pressure. Whereas Special's big thing in the ERLs has always been translating that into map pressure. So I actually think that given that Specials are going to be playing with two side lanes that are really good at pushing early advantages, is actually it makes them a tremendously good fit for the roster. I think they're going to have a very similar set to what they had last year, but with a better mid jungle setup for the resource allocation and a top laner with a much better champion pool for these scenarios. So I kind of disagree with your assessment of Excel in that regard. I'm not worried about resource allocation in mid to late game by any stretch of the imagination.
Simple question then. Where do you think Excel will finish?
I think I don't just think they're playoffs, but I think that they could push for the 4th spot because we don't see any changes coming out of Origen, right? So
I mean, my opinion is that I think that they have the talent on the roster to do it. But if they want to do it, one of Cry's or Special is going to have to play outside of their comfort zone. Now, that's where we disagree.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it will happen. Definitely, I like players like Special. I really like players like Cry's. But well, I mean, this roster, I hope that if somebody has to sacrifice in order to make the team function, that the org protects them from the criticism that will come. That's what I
also want to say that we did invite a Rome on this show, right? Like we've been
on the show.
I'm not. To be clear, I'm not criticizing you, right? Like I'm just providing additional context because obviously Mad Lions have experienced this firsthand, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, like we're not going to kick a Rome after one split. You know that he finished top 3 in LEC, right? I mean, it's absurd, right? In your rookie season, you finished top 3 in LEC. Like a Rome. So I'm just saying that having as a coach who's gone through something like this with a rookie. I would just say that this is something which Excel is a challenge Excel are going to have to handle. And this season, certain orgs, I'm not going to call out any orgs in particular, haven't protected their rookies from public criticism as well as they maybe should have. That's all I would say. Okay.
I think it was also a pretty fair painting of what the community narrative on a Rome is. I think that's actually pretty much what even a lot of LEC players who haven't looked into it would almost certainly say. So, although I would just say the response I would give is pretty simple. I don't really give a fuck what the person does in scrims, what they might be able to do, until you can literally just show me on the actual stage. It's just a wonderful hypothetical. Like I don't disbelieve you. I'm sure you're very earnest in what you're saying, but listen, coaches do a great job on this show playing defense, but eventually the players actually have to do something in the server.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, and of course, like if you know. I'm a Rome's coach, right? I'm not like a neutral party.
Yes,
I'm not a neutral. I'm not going to come on the show and say, no, this guy's completely trash. Like we're going to remove him. Like in one. No, of course.
Understood.
I'm not going to say that. But
that's why you're sure to end it with. Actually, it's about Cries here. You know.
but sorry. No, but I mean, look, it's just I'm just saying that they picked up good players. Like these are good academy players.
Sure.
I'm interested to see how they make it work because to me. It doesn't function, but I'm sure Veteran, unless they're going to just play literally 1-3-1 every single game. And sure, I mean, they're welcome to try.
I mean, I will say that Young Buck has had to coach teams with 3 resource-intensive players before. Like, let's not forget who was on that team before Nemesis was on that team, you know? And let's not forget Mechla's previous side lane tendencies or anything like this. If anybody, like, Fnatic may not have had a system, Young Buck does definitely have a system, and he's dealt with this specific issue before. So, you know, whoever recommended these players to them probably had that in mind as well when he did.
Well, yeah, maybe. But definitely, I'm on the Christ hype train. I'm really fascinated to see how he will do in LEC. I expect bans on his rise. LEC teams ban rise, please.
But it's so rare to see someone as good as Cries make it so obvious how strong they are when they are in a national league, a minor national league team. Like when he was on the Swedish Falcon lineup, like it was incredible. They would have destroyed Thorin's favorite player, Selfie, if their jungler had simply, you know, bought a jungle item level 1. They would have actually just stomped that game. Like they almost won that game anyway, and they had no jungler for the first 5 minutes. But the map setup that they went for there was fucking perfect how they were playing. So it wouldn't have even been close. We would have seen this guy pull off like one of the most major upsets in the RL history, if not for one of the most major blunders in the RL history occurring in the exact same game. Like this guy's been such an obvious talent for a while, and I am super excited to see how he performs. And I agree with you, Special shouldn't have been dropped in the first place.
Okay, right. One move that I think's one that it's just a singular move, so we can discuss it somewhat quickly, but it has its own angles, is the Misfits AD carry swap, where out goes B-Boy and in comes Kobe, obviously now with TSM fame. Right, the thing is, when we do this move, like one of the approaches I always take when I do my Thorin's thoughts about roster moves is you can't just do it as a one-way transaction. Like you have to ask, first of all, did B-Boy warrant being removed? And then you have to look at who replaced him and decide if it's a good move. So we've talked about this a lot on this show as well. So I'll start with you on this, Peter. Thoughts on B-Boy being removed and then that it's Kobe who replaces him?
I mean, if you're getting Kobe, fine. Yep. Good trade. No question. I mean, there's no question, right? Like, I mean, it's a good trade. I mean, I feel sad for B-Boy. I mean, nobody is... Lots of people were shedding tears that Kobe got dropped from TSM. I mean, it's a very slightly similar situation with B-Boy and Misfits, but, you know, like, I mean, Sure. Okay, okay, fine. I mean, it's not quite the same. I'm obviously joking.
Was it implied, by the way, because other people have suggested as much, that in scrims B-Voy was better, and that as a result was the reason why the Misfits players kind of were? It seemed like they were overhyping him.
Yeah, B-Voy and Abadage are scrim gods. Okay, that's all I would say. Those two players are really good in scrims. Kazi voted B-Voy, I think, second team or third team. He voted him above Upset on his.
That's toxic as fuck, but okay.
Yeah. I saw
that's toxic as fuck.
Every time I saw B-Boy be rated up there, by the way, I always just assumed, okay, you're doing this because there's a player on your team that could actually get into the top 3.
But
you throw your vote with B-Boy.
We have a meme in Mad Lions, just like, oh no, B-Boy is coming for us, and then run away. No, but actually, he performed. He's pretty good in scripts. Kobe. So then I really want to talk about Kobe because one of the saddest things I've ever seen is the show where Thorin, you and Veteran, Kobe had just won his first team AD carry vote.
Yeah. Come on, tell us off.
And he came onto the show, and you said you kind of didn't deserve this award, right? And
almost explicitly, yeah. You basically just told him he didn't.
He right? He didn't directly.
He's just a very agreeable person, isn't he? He was never going to flame us back. I will agree.
Exactly. Which made me really, really sad. So context for that.
Wait. Can I just say, very fast? I just want to say, I am fed up of being told that I'm flaming someone if I say they're not S+ and maybe they're just A tier. If you interpret that as flame, by the way, holy, I'm not necessarily saying this to you, Peter, but so many people obviously my opinion on Nemesis, etc. Right? It's just because I don't think this guy's the best player on the planet, I didn't think Kobe was the best AD carry in Europe. Doesn't mean I was flaming them.
The thing which made me sad is if you'd said that to Febiven or some who's the best? Febiven is the perfect. If you'd said that to Febiven would be like, screw you guys.
Yeah, he wouldn't care.
Febiven is actually an S tier mid and has been all these years, by the way. All right, he actually is that good.
But this was the split where Perks had just swapped to AD carry, so wasn't actually that good. Fnatic were garbage for
they tanked to the beginning. Yeah, of course.
They were horrendous, right? Okay, but anyway, look. So it was consistency over the course of the split. That's what these awards, inverted awards are for, right? That's one of the reasons why Humanoid wasn't considered for an award this split, because he was very good at the end of the split, but was inconsistent during the course of the split.
Okay.
There are reasons behind the scenes for that. I won't go into it, but basically, Kobe is a player that obviously at Splice for 2 years we built around Kobe. Our game plan was literally get to 35 minutes, find a way to get to 35 minutes. Give Kobe the ball, and Kobe will score the goal for you, right? You
Wait a minute. Even though I agree with the premise, I have to just rephrase that because the actual game plan went like this. I have actually the notepad here. It says step 1, be really good in the early game, square brackets because that's what plus/minus goal differential apparently means. Step 2, question mark, mid game. Step 3, Kobe 35 minutes has 2.5 items. Let's win the game. Something like that.
All I would say is that Splice 2 years ago, 2018. Okay, so Splice 2019, 100% characterized correctly. Splice 2018, dreadful. Well, not dreadful. Pretty we were 10th in goal differential in 2018. Had a really good mid game and get to 35 minutes, right? So you could either be good in the mid game or good in the early game, and both of those things will get you to 35 minutes.
Yes.
For the last time, AFK farming jungle does not make you good at early game. For the love of God.
Look. Okay, so obviously I'm not somebody who's neutral in this, right? Obviously, I think it's great. Obviously, I built it the team that the Splice team was. Kobe was a critical part of the Splice team.
Sure.
Right? He was the person who got the resources, and generally, when he got the resources, in fairness to him, carried the game, right?
Yeah, I always describe players like that. He was the tip of the spear. It doesn't mean he was the best player necessarily, but he was the person who put all the resources in and based the team around it. If you were going to win the game, he was going to be the guy getting the kills. Yeah, of course. I'd agree with that.
One sort of thing that I would characterize Kobe is so people like to think about League of Legends, they think about EA Sports games, like FIFA 2020 or something like this, right? Where players have individual stats, right?
Right. Yes.
And what normally in League of Legends, people are rated. The person who has the highest overall stats. Say you have an 8 out of 10 and 80 out of 100 in every category, right?
Okay.
And people like that generally get rated very, very highly by the by the public because they have no easily visible weakness, right?
Sure.
The way that I would characterize Kobe is a player who is, instead of 8-8-8-8, he's a player who's 4-4-10-10, right? Like in the situations where he's really, really good, he is like as good as it gets, right? But you have to build your team in a way that
you have to activate those strengths, yeah.
Exactly. Like you have to put those strengths into play, and you have to cover for his weaknesses, right? Because Kobe, I think and if Misfits can build their team and play this style of game where they can take advantage of Kobe's 10s, this is a really scary team. This isn't just like a playoff team. This is like Worlds team, right? Worlds like easy, comfortably a Worlds team. The problem is that will they be able to do it? I mean, it's worth saying. I made the playbook argument for rookies when talking about Mad Lions. It's the same thing with Misfits, right? Misfits have 2 rookies in their roster. Can they adapt? Can they add more pages to their playbook? And if so, will those pages be pages that Kobe will to take advantage of Kobe's strengths? Because
the implication
honest,
being here, Dan's going to have to basically be the weak side player.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Dan,
because you're going to have to prop up the bot lane a little bit, is what you've sort of implied, right?
But I mean, TSM clearly didn't find a solution to this, right? Like TSM's team fighting, it's absurd that you have Kobe as your AD carry.
It's wild, isn't it?
You cannot play team fights with Kobe as your AD carry. Like it's, I mean, I generally
put it this way. I'm with you, Peter. Like in that scenario, in the light of the other players that TSM has misused over the years, including Europeans, I don't look at that and go, "Wow, Kobe doesn't know how to team fight anymore." I go, "What the fuck did they do to this guy to make him look like this in the game?" Like I'm with you on that one. I don't really see how that goes against Kobe as much.
It's like you have a diamond tip spear and you keep hitting them with the wooden end instead. Describe the TSM experience. But yeah, it's really exciting. Obviously, I wasn't too happy when I saw it, but I can tell you that Kazi, and when they saw that Pugs was swapping back to AD carry and Kobe was back in Europe, they're really excited. It sucks a bit because part of the pitch that I remember making to Kazi is come to EU, play for us in LEC. You could like play against Pugs, who's one of the best AD carries in the world. At the time, you could play against. So it wasn't clear. Like the rumors were upset was maybe going to NA or something like this, but that Kobe, like there were lots of weird rumors in the off season, in the previous off season, like which some of them, if I repeat, like people will say you're just crazy. Like
there was some really crazy ones out there. People don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Youngbuck talked about one with Whippo swapping to jungle.
Yeah.
That was not even like a top 5 crazy rumor. Like there was some really so the pitch to Kazi, come to Europe, play against Hans Summer, play against Perks, play against Kobe, play against Reckless, all these players who performed at the international level, and then he comes and they've all gone, and the only one who's left is Reckless. Because Misfits have like traded, like Hans Summer has to go and play weak side now. He can't play his Draven on strong side, and I felt really, really bad for him in the first split. So they get to finally show like Kazi and Kaiser coming into next split, like they're really motivated in this offseason. So thank you, Perks, and thank you for Kobe, and hopefully, we'll see how things go on the Rift. So good swap could turn Misfits into like a guaranteed Worlds contender. Could not an improvement. Could be just a side. If it's a side grade, I'll be really, really sad because it means they won't have taken advantages of his strengths.
It can't be a side grade though. Like if they play the exact same way that they played right now, like what happened in those playoffs? Like they had really strong gold leads going into late game, and then they would lose. Why? Because a certain scrim god was getting caught out in those scenarios. These are situations that Kobe would just never open himself up to whatsoever. These were massive lapses in judgment that Kobe is famous for. Never even being in a situation that have lapsed in judgment in, right? Like even if they play exactly the way that they played beforehand, they will be immeasurably improved from this, and they won't just be a playoff team. It'll be a playoff team that is pushing. So this is a really, really strong setup.
I agree with you. Fair. But I just say that we've got to be careful here that we don't have a double standard, right? Which is that everyone thinks Upset is justifiably a top 80 carry in Europe, right? But if you remember, Game 4 against Fnatic, was it against? It was either against G2 or Fnatic. I can't remember which one. They lost. Anyway, in the key playoff games. No, it was against G2. It was the one just before they got knocked out, right? He was given all the resources. Like had a 2k gold lead just on himself, mispositioned in 2 key team fights, and they lose the series, right? Yeah. Like this can happen to really, really strong players. It can happen to players that You can have an off day, right?
I will say though that Upset has, for example, Upset had a really good history of Sven syndrome until very recently, right? It's not like Upset hasn't had this issue. Also, the famous death he had around Baron Way went really ham. There was a mistiming on Fresh Lantern there, right? Like it wasn't necessarily entirely on him as well. But I will say that Kobe is uniquely known for.
Sure, but B-Boy with also had similar situations. It wasn't always just B-Boy being in the wrong position, right? It was some teammates.
He never had such a salvageable position in when he was getting caught. Like and Kobe is uniquely conservative like this. Like the description of that you guys just wait for 2.5 free items on Kobe isn't just there because it was a really good way for you guys to play, but because Kobe almost demands that, because Kobe will not risk the gold advantage that he has accumulated for any reason whatsoever up to that point. Kobe will not allow his team to put him in that position. Right? My issue is that I look at the way that the meta is shifting right now. I look at the fact that we've been in a Maokai versus Ornn meta for a couple of patches now, and Riot are essentially overbuffing AD carries. I don't think AD carries deserve the buff that they are getting on current patch, right? Every time I look at a situation like this, I think, how is this going to swing closer to playoffs, closer to EU Masters, closer to Worlds, right? It like the way that Riot will do things, Riot will not do massive jungle changes. They won't change the fundamental aspects of jungle, right? They won't introduce rubber banding back or anything like that. They may tweak XP, but they won't do anything like that, right? So jungle will probably stay as it is right now. The state of mid lane will probably stay as it is right now. But the state of side lane could swing massively in the opposite direction. And then I actually do worry for Dan versus like the new talent like Cries, or versus the old talent like Alpha, like Wonder, like even Bwipo, who'll be playing on a strong side meta. That's when Bwipo is uniquely an incredibly strong player. I worry about Misfits in that particular scenario way later on in the split due to a meta shift. I don't think that they are insulated versus that right now. But the way that the game is currently set up, I think they have a really strong roster to hit the ground running. If they don't hit the ground running, my mind will just explode. I'll have no idea what the fuck happened.
No, but it's clear what's happened, right? It's second split rookie syndrome. Right?
Second split rookie syndrome.
No, but like, I mean, I'm going to be really clear on this, right? Like, there is, like, as somebody who, like, I'm putting myself here out for this, right? But often, the second split for a roster full of rookies is a really important split, right? To show
I agree.
That you can push on in your first split, right? This also goes to Mad Lions, right? Like, I don't think that. Mad Lions lost 6. Yeah.
Just to be clear here, like you're talking about what you mentioned beforehand, how like mostly rookie teams will have one or two set things, and yeah. No, I agree on that, but to call Misfits a rookie roster by any stretch is a bit. That's a massive. They have 2 rookies. Straight up into they have Razork and they have Danik, right? And Razork's already at that.
Come on, Dan is
no, come on, wait. By the colloquial usage of rookie, Dan's still a rookie. Come on, he hasn't even played one full year in LEC as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, to me, I think it's fair to say there are 2. Okay, if we don't,
even if you say 3, we're not on the levels of what Rogue were doing or what Mad Lions has been doing, right? We're not talking about
still a preponderance of inexperienced players, though.
Yeah. Right? I mean, well, sure, yeah, but Razork's already playing Razork isn't playing a one-dimensional style, right? I think we can agree on that, and Danik isn't playing a one-dimensional style either, right? And the way that their solo lanes and AD carry is situated right now would not indicate to me that these guys are going to necessarily have an issue of only playing one style because that's the only style that they've made work at an LEC level based on the idea that they are inexperienced. They would do that based on the idea that they have champ pool issues that they can't get over, right? I don't think it's the same thing.
To be clear, I don't think it's the case. We're not talking 1 page versus 10 pages. We're talking like 5 pages versus 50 pages, right?
Okay.
Like, sorry, does that sound a bit weird? It's like it's not like you could only say one style. It's like you have a set number of plays that you default to, and then you just build those as you gain more experience, right? And and that's something that they have to build on. And they have to show that they can do it in the same way that we have to show that we can do it, right? In the same way that Vitality actually, do Vitality have any rookies left from their first split?
Dude, they have Melitza coming in. But they don't
they
have
have
any.
no-
They have
comp,
comp,
right?
They have comp,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Oh, yeah, sorry, of course. Comp is the only one who's actually going in his second split.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this is another thing. Like, why wouldn't you maintain Steelback skins, but why would you like throw a bunch of new people? Like, I don't know. Like, yeah.
Okay, but anyway, we're talking about Misfits, right? So they, just by the same token, like, Kaiser, Kazi have to show more. So do Razork. So does
Denik.
right?
Yeah.
Yep. And we'll see how it goes, right? But Kobe is definitely, to go back to what we were talking about 15 minutes ago, definitely a very strong spear point, right? You can play around. So now they just need to craft the spear. Okay, that's all I said. Do you agree, Veteran?
Yeah, I mean, I think Feather and Razork, the way that they play right now, is a much more nuanced style than any sort of one-dimensional thing that they could have ended up with very easily with Razork. I credit that to Amazing as well. I actually gave Amazing my own personal Coach of the Split award because of the significant improvement Razork had. Razork actually plays the map. He's not playing a particular style. He's actually playing the map. I still think Feather is an S-tier mid laner. I actually thought he was the second best mid laner of LEC last split. And I even thought he was S-tier on the Misfits roster from last year. So I have a lot of faith in this roster, just not when the meta shifts, because then I don't think Dan's going to be able to play a heavy carry oriented style. He's never
on a final thing from Misfits. I hope that Kobe comes into the season not in a defensive mindset, but if people come and say to him, all you can do is team fight. I hope he comes and turns around and says, yeah, but I mean, that's all I need to beat you, right? Like, it's a standard thing that you said, Thorin, historically, right? I hope he just embraces his strengths and like,
Agreed.
Goes on
like Reckless should have done.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yep.
I agree. Right, one thing, let me put you to the test, though. If you're going to give such potentially high projections for the Misfits team, the barometer to me is this. Origen are the gatekeepers of the LEC. Like, there's no universe, as far as I'm concerned, where this Origen lineup wins LEC. I just can't see any possible way it could happen. They're even one of the least likely of the teams in that group to win, because look at how many of those players are just known quantities. Even the way they play are known quantities. So, to me, the concept is, if you can beat them, maybe you can challenge for the LEC. So, should Misfits, in your predictions, will they be a better team than Origen, if the Origen is the line that we're putting here on the LEC?
Thorin, you don't know how happy it makes me feel that no longer is a team that I'm working with considered the gatekeepers.
It would have been Spice in the past. You're right. It would have. I can't lie.
Not is Vitality now. Vitality don't have that either. I'm sure they're really happy about
all I'm going to say is, I just say this. That is music to my ears more than anything.
There you go. Hey, you're still doing a good job.
Okay, best case scenario for Misfits, it's not close, right? Best case scenario for Misfits, they stomp Origen into the floor and it's not going to be close. Worst case scenario, which I think is, if you imagine infinite alternate universes, I think 5% of those are best case, 15% of them are cases which they're better, about 20% are cases which they're the same, and 60% are cases that they're worse. That's how I would divide it. Obviously disagrees with me.
Oh God, this is the statement that I'm gonna end up like bringing up with my massive ego later on. But it's like Misfits should like completely fucking destroy Origen. I actually don't have much faith in Origen whatsoever. However, if the meta shift bounces back to top lane priority, Alfari's just going to like have his way with Dan, and the game will be really over really fast. That's the only way. That's the only way. If it flips back in time and Origen have qualified for playoffs, then yeah, then it's really horrible for Misfits.
We're saying Handro and Amazing, as good as they are, like I think we voted Amazing, like not Amazing. We voted Misfits, like for Coach of the Split. What I would say is that they are also rookie coaches, right? Like there's a lot of rookie coaching stuff.
Yeah. Also, when you have like support and jungle mains typically as coaches, like this is not to like insult their abilities, because what they can bring, like it's evidently being really really strong, right? Especially when it comes to jungle side. But you will typically have it that they will stick very much in looking at League of Legends from that role perspective. Amazing even made tweets about where are good resources to learn about laning phase, etc. Right?
I know the Origen coaching staff don't like Mad Lions much. They
Where do you get that impression?
How little they like us. But what I will say is that in cases like this, I will always bank on experience in coaching. It's one of the reasons, like the Jat thing, like I think isn't going to have the immediate impact that people think. Doesn't mean that I don't think you can be a rookie coach and do a really good job, but that's the main reason why I don't quite agree with you on that. But I do think if Handro and Amazing manage to find the solution to this roster, to make this roster really strong, I think that it won't be close. But it's not guaranteed, right?
Yeah.
That they're going to be able
Okay.
to.
Right, as we now move to another team, I will say, first of all, those are all the official moves. The rest are going to have to be speculation, or we can even just do hypotheticals of what people could or could not do. Now, one team who obviously was not even mentioned in any of this, I haven't even seen any rumours, is Origen. And if people don't understand, I'll reiterate some information that somehow gets past people, which is the Astralis Group, the parent company, which owns Astralis and Origen, so Astralis the CS team and Origen the LEC team. Earlier in the year, when the lockdown happened, which then span into a global recession, which obviously has massive secondary and tertiary effects on businesses across the world, they actually came out themselves publicly, since they're a publicly traded company, and said that the majority of their staff were taking voluntary 30% salary cuts based on how big their salaries were, and it was the top people who were taking the cuts, and the most junior members didn't take the cuts, which, by the way, actually implies they included players within that. They never said if all the players took the cuts, but they did include players in the groups of people taking the cuts. I will just say this. Not only did they say that publicly, that they needed to do it for the health of the organization and running the business, but secondly, in CSGO at the moment, they've since that time taken on 2 additional players who receive salary. So the notion that they were ever, in my opinion, going to sign another player, it would have had to be contingent on selling a player, letting a player go who somehow had a cheaper salary and you could bump down if he went to the lower level and then bring another player up for cheap. Like the notion that they were ever going to do a big name upgrade like that, for example, that they were going to get some superstar support, probably was never going to happen if people just understand some of the behind the scenes considerations before you even get into League of Legends.
But by the same token, the LEC, the European League of Legends, right, was franchised 2 years ago, right? And 2 years ago, Alfari and NateDOhDoubleG were arguably the two biggest free agents on the market for their position, arguably, right? So, and they both went to Origen. So I don't have any evidence behind the scenes. I don't know how much teams pay players, but all I would say is I would be shocked to hear that if Alfari and NateDOhDoubleG were working for pennies on Origen. That's all I would say, right? And
to see, definitely not.
So that's where the money was spent then, basically. They probably are big time players for you.
Yes.
I would be so shocked if Origen were an org in the LEC that paid in the bottom half. That's what I would say. And, sometimes you see a lot of these complaints online about how, Origen say, we don't, poor us, we don't have any, capital. There's nothing here, right? And that's why we had to look at all of our options, right? But I mean, maybe Deficio is an insane negotiator. Maybe Origen, like the Origen branding, they offered, like, they gave them a massive 15 slide presentation saying this is what Origen offers you. Denmark is the best place to live. It's like, all of these kind of things, and maybe they're signed for pennies. But it would shock me to my core, knowing everything I know about esports, if this was the case. That's what I would say. So that's why they're having to fill in the gaps, because they've chosen, just like Dignitas, I think, publicly said when they said they're investing 40% of their salary budget into Huni or something. I think that's why, like, if you choose to go put that much for one of your players, then you have to make sacrifices elsewhere.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I know it's not your sport, Peter, but anyone who follows the NFL understands this situation preeminently well, because basically anyone who's like a Super Bowl winning level quarterback, everyone just gives the majority of their budget to him because they get the highest salary in the league. And in doing so, it's quite famous that now your GM has to be like twice as good as the other GMs because you work with so little to cover all the other roles. So there's a lot of teams that have like just a good enough team, kind of like an Origen team, because they've got the superstar player, and then the problem is it's the other players they have to skimp on, and you have to kind of find a miracle. You have to find a diamond in the rough for cheap, usually, in that scenario.
Yep. I will say that I don't know the order of the Xerxes signing or the Destiny signing, but what I will say is that Destiny performed exceptionally well. He was the best sort of emerging region support we saw at Worlds and Scrims, and Xerxes signed for Origen. So maybe that explains why.
Do you think, since you've not so far, you've done a great job playing defense for almost everyone on the show, even people who haven't actually in some way been touched by your fucking Midas touch like hand at some point. So here's the question, right? I want to see how good you are at this shit. Do you think Destiny's actually a good support? Is he going to do better in this next split, Peter? Go on, sell me on this. I'll just sit back,
Okay, so the defense, the correct answer, the politically correct answer would be to say we haven't seen everything from Destiny that we can possibly see in the first split. However, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that they should have signed. I'll get in trouble. Like there are supports out there in the regional leagues who offer more than Destiny on a wider range of champions, but maybe not on multiples. Yeah,
but there were also options that they had in that off season that they could have taken.
I really wanted to say names. I really just want to say they should.
Yeah, I know, but anyway, like most people who are listening here can immediately think of names without us having to name obscure regional league supports, right? It's really obvious what was available in the off season when you see who landed where, and Origen themselves are really delusional. They think that they were outside of the budgets that they had left over. They definitely were not outside the budgets they have left over. Like, I have no qualms about saying this kind of stuff. Like, I do know the salaries that we're talking about here. Like, it's like these guys were absolutely within their budget. The idea that the support talent wasn't there, which was their first line of defense, has been completely eviscerated and disproven. And thank you partly for helping with that, Peter. I
don't know anything, right? I don't have
but I'm talking about your success with Kaiser, right? Like the idea that there wasn't rookie support talent has been completely destroyed by the performance of said rookie support talent display. Even like Danik had a really, really strong
and that he confirmed he never even had a tryout.
Yeah. I mean, like I mean, the idea that there wasn't talent there is being eviscerated. The idea that there isn't support talent left in the regional leagues has also been eviscerated by the recent EU Masters. It's quite clear now to everyone, and not just like people who are watching, that top lane is actually the area where we're lacking in Europe right now. There's actually a surplus in the support talent pool, and it's ludicrous for even people in Origin. I know the numbers we're talking about here, that they couldn't afford any of these guys. They 100% could have taken any of these guys. 100% they could have.
But I mean, I saw your EU Masters show where you went, where you had Tinks and Xinged on, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I would say for this kind of thing is I kind of understand where Origen are coming from, because basically my philosophy for this kind of thing is if you're seeing Tinks for the first time at EU Masters and you're thinking this guy's really, really good, why don't we sign him? That's horrendous approach to going in. Like, if EU Masters is the first time you've heard of Tinks, maybe you shouldn't be signing Tinks, right?
No, wait, I'm sorry, but if EU Masters is the first time you've heard of Tinks, you shouldn't be signing anybody, period. Like, holy shit, like, how incompetent is this guy if this is the first time that they've seen him? Like, what the fuck are you, why are you in charge of anything? Like, how, but legitimately, that will be the case for so many GMs. These people are fucking parasites, man, but continue.
I mean, like, I've only worked with two GMs in Europe, right? Two separate GMs, right? And both of those players, both of those people, when they didn't know, to give more responsibility to the coaches, and they were never saying, I'm going to veto this guy, and you have to sign this other guy, right? It's like, this is the person you want. Okay, let me go and talk to him a little bit, make sure that he's not like the culture fit and that kind of thing, and then sure, go and sign him. If you believe he's the right guy, go and sign him, right? So I don't really know how these kind of roster building processes work, but what I will say is that there's a lot of good support talent out there in Europe. Like, it used to be a wasteland out there in Europe, but so many good supports coming up. So but I don't think Destiny's bad. I can play defense. No, it's too late.
I want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to Raxo and Erdot here, actually, because I think that they are two really strong looking talents right now in terms of support pool that no one's talked about. Everyone's talked about like a lot of the other support, but I want to shout out those two very quick because I think they are really strong.
By the way, listen. Go on.
I'd say that I think Erdot is a player that I've respected for a very long time. That's all I say.
Right, without making this a huge thing, but we could do it for like 10 minutes. We could have some fun with it, Peter. Right, you are one of the people who, even though Splice is long gone now, you can let it go, mate. It's Mad Lions now. It's a new era. You've got totally different players. We don't need to open old wounds, but if you insist, right, you are one of the people who clearly loves when I've seen a bunch of coaches suggest they're going to do it. Like, we're going to expose the narratives that all these shows make, Obviously, my boy Kays even did it, who comes under attack. Anytime he fucking tweets, let's face it. Like, Kays could ask for an ice cream, and somehow that would invoke like a political situation all around the world. Like, I like his intentions.
Did you see but just go on.
Yeah, whatever. So, what point I was going to make was this: just like when you guys were Splice, where there was so much contention around the narrative around the team and the way the team was characterized, and which players got blame and which players got the praise, etc. There is still a sense that Origen is the new team in this sense, where their coaching staff thinks everyone has the wrong take and this is a bullshit narrative, and they're not ever playing this scaling style or playing for late or being inactive early game, that this is all nonsense. By the end of the split, they'd changed completely. In the playoffs, this is part of the reason they were drafting the way they were drafting. Are you someone who... I saw on Twitter you were kind of like backing some of that thinking. So are you someone who agrees with that the Origen was misrepresented, Peter?
Okay, well, let's look at it objectively. Let's compare Splice and Origen objectively.
All right.
I don't really want to go into this too much because it's the past.
Yeah, just a little tangent. Yeah.
Like Splice were a team that basically people said wouldn't even make playoffs, right? So context for Splice. Okay, that's going to leave Splice aside for one side, not talk about Splice. Okay, Origen. Have the option, like if you appear on the broadcast, you have an option to have a larger say in defending yourself from the narrative, right? Sure. That is out there. That's one of the reasons why when I was talking about Excel and talking about this philosophy of having sort of two people from each team, you're not going to have the chance to defend yourself if you're not considered one of those two people from the team, right?
Sure.
So Origen, let's just look at things objectively. Preseason power rankings, Origen, power rank number 2 behind G2, even ahead of Fnatic. I think Fnatic were in B tier and Origen were in A tier, were the top of A tier, and G2 were in S tier, number 1. Just fact number 2: Origen players and staff have been on the broadcast more than any other team except G2.
Of course.
Okay? Fact number 2. Fact number 3.
Mainly because Fnatic turns down these sorts of things. But anyway, we'll put that by the by. Let's forget about that for a second.
Fnatic have... Yeah.
They have their own history with that shit.
Origen more than Fnatic. That's something. Okay, so number 3, Origen were a team that basically everyone acknowledges are the 3rd best team in Europe. Right? Now, I feel that we were cheated. As a Mad Lions coach, I feel I was cheated out of a Mad Lions versus Origen best of 5. I wish that there was a way that Mad Lions could have played Origen in a best of 5, so we could, so there wouldn't be these sort of bad feelings going on into the summer split, right?
Sure.
But there's a lot of people out there who say Origen were definitely 3rd. Mad Lions got lucky. G2 trolled around, and they didn't deserve to win the best. Right? When we get to G2, that's an interesting thing to come back on. But that is, all those things are objective, right? Like, I haven't made any subjective comments. I put those facts out
reasonable, yeah.
to the jury, right? And then I say, I just say, these are all things you may want to consider, and draw your own conclusions, right? I'm just providing the facts as they stand. It's up to people to feel whether they get fair representation or not. Okay, that's it.
But you don't have any kind of qualitative judgment on whether or not Origen was in fact some early game team that had figured it out and all the rest of that jazz. Like, I realize in this case, it's almost like, listen, I realize in this case, it's like enemy of my enemy is my friend. And at this point in time, we're with you, mate. Let's take down fucking Origen with the Mad Lions army, and let's make the real 3rd team needs to be put in. Yeah, The coach of a team's responsibility is not to play nice League of Legends. It's to win, right? Yes. And if Origen think this is the way that they're going to win games, right? It's not there. People can complain all they want about, unpleasant, scaling. Of course, yeah. Legends, say it's boring, but whatever. Yeah,
you can't. But it's not it's your job as a coach to find the best way you can possibly win, and to find the players you have, right? And so, I don't. Do Origen seriously believe that they're not getting credit for being an early game snowball team?
Okay, I just have to say.
I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, really? You can't?
No, I can hear you. I think maybe for a second something like this. Can you hear us now, Peter?
No, I can hear you, but I can't hear.
You can't hear me?
But I.
Oh.
Oh, I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
All right, there you go. Right,
Oh,
continue.
okay.
I'll cut that
Yeah,
part
I
out.
can hear you.
We're all good. Okay, yeah. Like all I have to add there is that if you are, and they are claiming, and they were in control of this roster from inception onwards, right? And you had the reign with the capital, we can say you had, and you produced this, and you've ended up in a situation where you believe that this is the correct way to play the game to maximize the potential of your team. You have run it down at some point. I just have to say that you have run it down, and you can't just go around saying these kinds of things about other staffs when you are one of the most easily to criticize staffs in terms of setup for this roster, in terms of execution for this roster of any of the staffs out there. Like I find the whole situation fucking absurd that these guys are like playing the victim when we could have gone so much harsher on these guys than we did. Like, we talked a lot about how certain players on that team are like stuck in their ways, or like maybe this is a tendency that's gone straight up from them, but we haven't talked about the fact that Origen chose to stick with all of these guys in the first place, chose and opted into this setup, and their defenses of opting into this setup were even just straight delusional. Like, these guys have gotten away with so much less criticism than they probably deserve, and I'm not going to give them that leeway on the next split if they're going to behave like this on Twitter, because I find it fucking pathetic, to be honest. So
Well, I mean, okay, so I feel like I've kind of dodged your question. So let me just.
I haven't, Peter. It's all good. Don't worry.
No, I mean, what's the best way? The question is, do you want to be treated as legitimate title contenders? Because everything Origen have said is, we are like challenging for the title.
Yeah,
we're top
exactly. This is our time. Yeah.
G2 and Fnatic, like, we are on the same level as G2 and Fnatic.
Agreed.
Look at the players we signed. Look at how we're going to go. If you want, right, to be treated in and rated at the same level as those people and held to the same standards, you cannot complain. If you think, okay, these expectations that people had at the start of the season were not reasonable, right? Like, oh no, we shouldn't have been treated in the same group. We're like an underdog story. These are all of our players are players who've been underrated for all of this time. We think we've got a really good team cohesion here. We're gonna like try our best to like bring Xerxes his first ever EU LCS title, but it's a work in progress, and summer split, we're going to be there competing for the title. If that is the narrative and you feel that you have been unfairly characterized as like a title contender, then fine, right? Like, then I can acknowledge that Origen were treated unfairly in terms of the narrative that was put out, right?
Okay.
Like, but then Origen should acknowledge that is the narrative that they should have, and not the we are title contenders and we're definitely going to win, especially when we beat Fnatic in the first game of the season, and that shows that we are better than them and they are trash. Haha.
Look, man, you guys got lucky against G2, all right? They actually tried against Origen, all right?
I mean,
I wish Origen would get lucky and win some of these fucking best of fives.
Mad Lions got really screwed by this move to online.
Well, we can go to listen.
It's absurd.
We can get to that issue, like we said, when we get to the G2 topic. I would just say this. I'll just quote something that I wrote in my recent article about Kelsey, that she actually wrote back in 2015, I believe in the first half as well. And this is just how far ahead of the game and thinking about League of Legends she is compared to, quite frankly, some motherfuckers who are hired today. She just wrote, compensating for gaps in playstyle is often the unspoken goal of team design, but the roots of these player flaws aren't immediately apparent. Now, if you know Veteran, I never deny my influences. That's one of the reasons, along with how I think about CSGO, why that's the way I've always broken down the teams, is what you try to look for is, obviously there are players who look way better on certain teams because of this exact factor. Yes. Like, their weakness is masked by someone else sacrificing, or in an ideal scenario, just their strength covers your weakness. And as a result, it may be a Kobe, it could be all sorts of players. Broxer, these players in certain teams will be elevated to the status of the best player in their position, but the problem is, if you're trying to judge them individually like those awards and selections would, you can certainly come up with flaws that maybe won't seem apparent in the game. Yeah.
This is why my S tier is like very difficult for a lot of people to reach, because of a lot of people, I have seen very good things from them and I haven't seen them tested in other regards, because I see that they have been shielded away from these other tests by other aspects of the roster, by other ways that the team is playing. Broxer I could very easily identify how he was being babied around, right? I could very easily identify the flaws that Fnatic were covering up there. And you have to be able to identify this when you are assessing individual talent. For me, I won't give someone S tier just because they've never been punished in a season. If I can clearly see that the reason they haven't been punished is because of aspects the rest of the team around them is made up for. And with Kobe in that split where he got first place, it was very, very obvious to me the areas where he hasn't actually proven himself, he hasn't actually shown up, where Reckless has had to, and Reckless has also been able to equal him at the stuff that he was really, really, really strong at. And obviously, Peter's going to disagree on that because he thinks the guy is just like a straight 10, and he's probably going to say that Kobe is like a better team fighter than Reckless. But like, I think that if you're doing that stats board, I saw everything to give. I've seen everything, and admittedly, Reckless has had a much longer career, so it's a lot easier for me to see to get at least 8s and 9s on every single stat at this point, right? And 10s on a lot of them as well, right? Whereas with Kobe, like he hasn't had to be tested on some of these because his teams have always they have always placated to his strengths and defended his weaknesses very well.
Oh, I mean, come on, Splice.
Apparently not TSM, but you know.
No, but Splice 2016-17 was a wonder trashy, wonder cold as he renamed himself to.
You know what?
It was a
That's true. You know what? That's true. Yeah. So I do actually have evidence that if you don't disguise for these, he's not actually the effective late game carry that we think of him as today. Like we do actually see evidence he's actually a pretty vulnerable player in that regard.
Oh, I mean, I thought he was pretty good. No.
He was all right.
I mean, I was in Brazil at the time, right?
Wait. There's a difference between pretty good and number one.
He was all right. Exactly. He was never going to be an all-pro, was he?
I mean, Kobe and Mickey was a really strong bot lane from what I saw. Because I was in Brazil.
Well, luckily that Mickey X guy didn't turn out to do anything later in his career, Ethan.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
what's the fucking test control group on that one, Peter? Come on.
You could identify how much of that was Mickey.
Actually, like this is the really Mickey was not that good on Misfits. He's insane on G2, right? He was insane on Splice. He was insane on Splice. And he was insane on G2.
Yeah. I actually, oddly enough, I had to bring this up on a Reddit thread today because people were debating about whether G2 itself was a super team, and I'm like, you guys are actually forgetting Mickey's reputation post Misfits. I still had Mickey as S tier though because I saw what was going wrong. I saw what was going wrong. I knew how much of that was on Mickey and was on others. Like I think Foremost is like a really, really good point here because I think you had like it's easy to assume that a player looks really, really good if you view his performance on that team in a vacuum and just like eliminate all of the other things. But it is very possible to identify what it is they're not being tested on the team, right?
Fair.
Yeah.
But again, like from the coaching side, like internal in an org, if a player has a weakness, you do not want to show that weakness. You don't want to like put that player in a position where their weaknesses are tested, right?
But Destiny has to leave the base at some point, so.
Right, what about this then? So Peter, again, another topic that we have obviously discussed to death is the swap back of caps and perks. So I would like, on the one hand, I'd like to just get your thoughts initially on that. Like, what are your actual thoughts on this swap back?
So I think that, firstly, I think it's the right move. Secondly, what I will say, normally on a show like this, I can't go into that much detail, but as I'm pretty sure caps and perks are not going to go and swap back, it doesn't matter. Like, the reason Mad Lions beat G2 is because G2 had a problem with how they were contesting midwave, okay, in the mid game. You go back and you go and watch all of the games G2 had this problem for the entire season. It was a problem which we were able to exploit in the best of 5 series, and that's why we won the series. It's not because G2 had an off game, right? G2 played the same way that they've always played. It's just that the teams that they played in the regular season didn't punish this, and we didn't play them like for the last 6 weeks of the season. Like people forget that Mad Lions beat G2 once in the season and had like an insane goal lead, like in the first game of the year. I can't remember what it was, right? And G2 still picked us, right?
Yes. Holy shit, I remember that. Actually.
And all that we did was we exploited how Caps was contesting midwave in the mid game. That's all we did. The entire series, like we should have won the series against G2 3-1, but we really like sitting backstage during that game, listening to my players laughing when we have a 6K goal lead, saying, ha ha ha, wouldn't it be funny if we lose this game from here? Not like, ha ha, like joking, like scrim level ha ha, like that I've heard them say in scrim sometimes, like, ha ha, wouldn't it be funny? And like hearing them going out to that game, and then like when they're coming back from the room, because we're offsite, they're coming back from the room and they're literally they're laughing. They're not like nervous, they're like laughing. And like Mac and I and Cassie and the coaching staff are looking at each other thinking, okay, like anger doesn't. Okay, but anyway, so I'm getting sidetracked. But anyway, like we should have won the series against G2 harder than we did, but they had a problem contesting midwave, and like we punished it, right? Now G2 last year were an extremely dominant team and were never tested. G2 the year before had all kinds of problems. G2 in the past have been pretty solid teams, but have always had mechanical skills, right? What grabs, because I mean, this is not something that players can easily do by themselves, right? But what grabs, and what's their analyst called?
Duffman?
Duffman?
Yes,
Duffman. Okay,
yeah,
Duffman. What they did in those 2 weeks is G2 switched their entire playstyle into a playstyle that they have never played with this roster in a 2-week turnaround. And against Origen, they just played the same way that they played against Mad Lions, right? But in that 1 week between the Origen game and the games that they played against Mad Lions and Fnatic, they fundamentally changed everything. Like I've never seen a team do something like this. And I think that is like when we look back and we talk about when Grabs retires in however many, I don't know how long esports coaches can coach for, but let's say like when Grabs retires, he's an old man of 45 because this is the industry where we're in.
Sure.
Okay, but whatever.
Fucking hell.
This season, I think, is going to be the one that to me will stand out.
You're trapped there for 20 years, Grabs. Holy shit.
No, because what G2 did this season is insanely impressive, right? And I mean, they switched a playstyle that teams had that a solution had been found to, but was the comfort of their players, into a different playstyle with a 2-week turnaround. And then, I mean, basically basically Wonder was sacrificing things to make sure that Caps was never by himself on midwave, right?
By the way, just as an aside, since they themselves, when they've told the story, like they tell the story like a fucking movie scene where like right before the big championship final, like you have no chance of winning, right? Literally the goal's like this, right? Caps is just awake at night, thinking about stuff. And he comes into the room like, you're not going to believe this, Craps. I've just figured out we can do like Cogmore fucking Lulu as the bot lane. And it'll probably work. Let's try it in the final, coach. Put me in. Like, if this is to be believed, right? What an insane luxury they must have in their team, Peter. I mean, I've heard of most stories I hear of players is the opposite. The player comes to you and says, sorry, boss, I actually can't play 2 of the 3 meta things that I have to play for your drafts to work. So can you just redo the whole thing? Like, it's normally the opposite. Like, this must be kind of bullshit if you're a coach, right? This is the level of luxury that the G2 guys live in.
I mean, to be clear, like, it's our job, it's my job, and the job of the other coaches to find a solution to this, right? And this is why I was really surprised about what happened in the finals, right? Because this was the first time we'd ever seen, like, we'd never seen G2 do something like this, right? Where, I don't want to give away too much going into next season. Like, the way, basically, let's just say that G2 found ways to cover for Caps's flaws as an AD carry. And now they found a second way to cover for Caps's flaws as an AD carry by switching him out and not playing him as AD carry anymore.
Yes.
But the way that G2 managed to do this, like I was sitting there backstage, right? We're analyzing the game as the game is going on. And we're looking at the game saying, what is Jankos doing here? What is Wonder doing here? Are these like Jankos and Wonder? Like, I mean, have they like switched players here? Like, why are they standing here? Why are they in this position? Like, I've never seen G2 do this kind of thing, right? Like, I've tracked, like, one of the things I like to do when I'm scouting players is I will literally go back and watch every single game that this player has played in their entire career. Like, I've literally watched every single game Wonder has played from when he was like that is available on YouTube, right? And I have seen the things he was doing in that series he has never done in his career. Like, there are things that he has done in that series which he's never done. And like, it took us two games to work out what they were doing, and by then G2 already had 2-0 in the series. We managed to get 1 game back, and then game 4 they played Kalista, which we didn't know they could play Kalista bot lane. So
okay.
But we hadn't found anything early on in the draft to go and challenge them. But the first game we were looking at this and we're thinking, what's going on here, right? Is this a one-off? Is this like should we alter our strategy? Like, we had a strategy going against G2, right? then it's like, oh no, it's probably a one-off, right? It doesn't really matter that much, right? Game 2, they're doing the exact same thing, right? They've literally done the exact same thing in every single position. Wonder is moving to a certain place based on a certain timing, right? And then we're like, oh, this is what they're doing. That's really, really smart, but we've got you now. We know how to counter it. And then we won the third game countering it, and then fourth game they got us, right? But Fnatic had that info. They had 4 games worth of info.
Yes.
And they didn't change their play style at all. They just played G2 as if they were playing them in the regular season, even though G2 had fundamentally changed everything about how they were playing the game. So I don't know. It makes me really motivated for next season, right? Okay. So like after when we lost the G2, so I have a tick, an unhealthy habit, right? Which is that whenever the season is done, whenever I lose the last series of the season, I will rewatch that series over and over again until like I literally fall asleep. And I rewatched that series until 8 p.m. the next day after we'd lost, until the broadcast. Like I didn't sleep before the G2 Fnatic game. Because I was just rewatching that series over and over again, thinking, "This is really good. What can we do against this next year?"
Okay.
And next split. So I'm really excited for next season. I think Grabs has to get a massive amount of credit for this because this isn't something like, even if he's not coming up with these ideas, he's moderating the discussion, right? Because G2 have like said publicly, I think Perks has said publicly that they were mad after they lost to us. Like they were really furious after they lost the series. And getting people to calm down and have a constructive discussion without blaming each other deserves a massive amount of credit. But what I would say is this season has to go back. Like when Grabs retires, what he has done this year on G2 is more impressive than I've seen from any other G2 win in the history of their time, because they've never had to change the style before. They've never had to fundamentally change their identity as a team. And now they're going to just switch back to what they did in last year, and things will be fun again. So we'll see. But
so what I appreciate here is like the diligence of Peter Dunne here, veteran. What I imagine is the Mad Lions coaching room was like, he's there, he's digging through old VODs of Wonder on Dignitas's EU Challenger team back in season 5, while Mac just screams at him like that fucking scene from The Prestige going, "Why can't you outthink him?" There we go.
I mean, like this is why best of 5s are great, right? Like, because if this was a best of 3, I remember back in the day, like it used to be best of 3.
Of course.
Then like the series would have just been over. G2 would have stomped us into the floor 2-0, and we'd have gone, what just happened just then? I mean,
and this is also why now having a lower bracket's cool, because you get these rematches, which can become the chess match of the coaches.
I mean, I'm not happy that there's a lower bracket. Like I want my third game against G2, right? Like we got G2 once, G2 got us once. Like, where's my rematch? I want my rematch. I don't get a rematch. G2 are in the finals. Then they win 3-0 in the finals. I have to watch them without sleeping, not having slept, like beat Fnatic, thinking, why aren't you doing anything, Fnatic? And like I'm just like, give me the rematch. I want my rematch. So I don't like lower bracket play unless we're in the lower bracket and then we win. In which case, I love lower bracket play, and it's the best system that could ever have been created. So there we go.
Right, if we're going to pivot to another team, obviously now we're going just off the rumours now, veteran. But one of the teams that is an obvious team that should be looking at potential upgrades is SK. And the rumour is maybe they get Tinks or some of these players from ERL. What would you say about this? Like, either, first of all, if you have any inside info, you can give it. If not, just speculate. Like, should they make changes? Will they?
I think they should. I think that they should make changes in jungle support, maybe. I don't want to say that limit is bad, but my thinking on roster has kind of shifted recently. And I think that if you have a really strong jungle support, you can build almost any amount of carries around them that you like, because the carries then have to execute. So long as the carries have like a base level of ability in laning phase to at least play out matchups confidently in a specific way early on, so to not mess up the jungler's early pathing, then you can then it's very easy to build free carries around them, much more than it is to have 3 good carries and then take any random jungle support. I think jungle support is absolutely critical, and I think in both those areas they were lacking. It's never really been a secret that Trick has been like a you could say a herbivore kind of jungler pre-6. And he continued with that tendency this year. But even mechanically, Trick looked really bad this year. And Limit, I don't want to say that Limit is like completely bad. He's obviously on the lower end of supports, and he obviously got he got the perks buff in terms of his hype, right? But he doesn't do anything around the map that you've had previous SK supports doing, right? Like Dreams last year was actually very, very good, especially specifically around the 8-minute Herald timing. He was the first support in Europe to be on time for that early on, and large amount of the reason why SK were able to make that initial roster work was because they had both Selfmade and Dreams, right? And then when the moment they lost Selfmade, my god, was that a nosedive, right? That was a massive nosedive, and I think that those two positions needed to be prioritized for them. I think Crownshot got a lot of flack that he didn't deserve. I think he's actually a very good laner. I think that Genax actually impressed me, because he never stuck out to me as one of like the premier mids in the ERLs. He still doesn't. I still think it was a crime that like Zaze wasn't there in the first place, and he's the guy that's been heavily rumored to go into SK. But I think that you could have maintained Genax, and if you could have maybe even maintained Sakura, if you upgraded on jungle support. So obviously Tinks is the big one everyone's talking about, right? And he also gives you a very strong center of communication in this regard. So Mystiques was also rumored to be going there at a point. I'm not quite sure on the status on that rumor, because the parasitic Twitter accounts that do nothing but tweet these like change their stories every few days, and to a point where I start finding it really pointless to follow them. But that at least was a rumor. But they also rumored that like Mystiques goes Shulk or whatever. But at least those are the areas that I would be looking to attack if I was SK Gaming. And we also hear a lot about like Genax shifting to top, and indeed he has a solo queue account that's actually really high up on top lane specifically right now. So
have you heard anything about who the new SK coach is going to be? So I mean, they fired all their coaching stuff, no?
They have Unlimited going as straight free agents, as far as I know. Don't know about Kanani and
Broken Shard also
Kanani,
said,
interesting. Kanani's going to be.
Yeah. So Kanani actually I really like. Broken Shard was on their CAD team, but like he hasn't been on the LEC team for ages. But that's like the story of Broken Shard's whole career.
I mean, what I would say is Genax has the unfortunate situation that he is a mid laner in Europe. Today,
true.
For context,
he should just icon it. He should just icon it. Go to NA.
I mean,
top 5 immediately.
So the news. So if people want to date when this is being filmed, Hatrix has just been announced as Excel's mid laner. I won't go into that into too much. Excel Academy.
Sok was just being announced as 1907 Fenerbahce's top laner as well.
Oh,
so
interesting.
he's like definitely gone.
Okay, well he landed on his feet well. But anyway, the reason why this matters is we're trialing out mid laners for our academy team. Now, I'd like to think that I watch a lot of ERLs, right? I try to follow as many leagues as I possibly can. But in this tryout process, where we are trying out mid laners, there are 2 mid laners who I've literally never heard of. Like, I haven't heard of them from solo queue. I haven't heard of them from ERLs. And I just watch these guys, and I'm like, huh. Like this, what is this? Like, this is just a random. Sorry, that's a bit harsh. This is some 17-year-old guy or like some teenager who I've never heard of, and he can shot call the game like almost LEC level. He can like his mechanics are insane. Like this is the talent pool that you have in mid lane coming up all the time. Like if Genax was like a mid laner in. I really don't want to flame. Let me pick another region. If he was a mid laner in, let's say, Turkey, right? I'm not going to go for this. Like this guy would be, top 2 in his league. But he's a mid laner in Europe. It sucks to be him, right? Like I mean, and that's
he I think well, to be honest. Like, I don't
think he's performed badly. But I mean, look at the mid laners in LEC. I mean,
but you could, but this is an argument to like recycle talent. I think Genax showed like a shit ton of potential given what he had, and I think he actually laned really, really well. Admittedly, mostly on Aatrox, versus some really strong talents, like including Humanoid, including.
I don't think he should drop out and like give up on his career, right? Like I think.
However, Zaze is better, but yeah.
Sure. Okay, then let's work on the hypothesis that Zaze is better, right? Or other mid laners who may have been at EU Masters who may or may not be Polish. Maybe better. But sorry, I did get you to crack. I was trying to get you to crack, but I failed. But what I'm going to say about this is that he is he's really good. But the problem is that in EU, if you want to be a top 5 mid laner in EU, you have to be better than one of Nuke Duck, Humanoid, Nemesis, or Febiven. So, I mean, that's the reality, right? And is he better than those players? No, he's not, right? So, do you think he can develop? It's hard for me to say, and it would be inappropriate in my position to go and say what
I will say that yes, whereas individually, I would doubt that he'd be able to attain that kind of a height. I don't think you have to individually attain that kind of a height to even be the world's champion. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't setups that Gen X could fit in. And have the sky being the limit, right? Like it's perfectly reasonable to assume that he could still end up on that kind of team. Huh?
He could be a really good top laner.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah, but we're talking about him as like a mid laner right now, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, like that's like the big rumor. It's a bit strange to me, but at the same time, I do think that if you are concerned when you look at the top pool in the ERLs, you there is a legitimate reason for you to be so. Like one of the standout top laners in the ERLs, Yoppa, didn't even get a game in the last split, right? Okay. So the most of the top laners that I'm looking at now are actually like very, very young or playing in minor leagues. And they need a lot more time, right? Whereas with mid lane, when you're talking about players like that, you're talking about players like Diplex, for example. But it's not like we're praying that he will be like a potential LEC mid laner next year, because the mid lane pool is like so insanely vast that I'm more like excited to see what Diplex does in like 2 to 3 years time.
Sure.
Right. Whereas with top lane, there's actually a lot of pressure on the talented top laners that are in solo queue now. To actually kind of step up to the plate, because otherwise I don't necessarily blame them. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to go and pay for Sigenda's buyout? Are they going to pay for Yoppa's buyout? Are they going to pay for Aggressivo's buyout? SK aren't historically a very rich organization. Can they afford to negotiate with LEC teams for these academy players? I don't think that they can.
But I think that there's an interesting thing here, which is, if you are an academy player, you have 3 options, right? If you are a player, a young rookie EU talent coming up, you have 3 options for how to progress in your career, right? Number 1, you can join an academy team, right? Number 2, you can go to an emerging region and try to prove yourself in try to go to Worlds. That's what Inax did, basically. Number 3, you can join like other regional teams, right? And then you have more flexibility, right? Because if you join an academy team, you're essentially tying yourself down to an organization. And some of these organizations treat their academy players well. Mad Lions, yay! We like
and some of them are lying fucks, by the way. Avoid all franchise schemes.
But you're saying that, right? That's what you're saying, right? But here I have to go
saying, and then you're like, but not Mad Lions, all right? What's more, that Peter is a saint, or that Mad Lions are simply being represented here right now?
Oh no, you've got me. Oh no. But look, what I'm saying, like, there's a serious point here, right? Which is that if you are a mid laner, like a rising talent, it's important that you think carefully about what's your path into LEC, what you're hoping to achieve in your career, and how you can get to that level, right? And about this, they sometimes take the best offer and tie themselves into places where maybe they don't want to tie themselves into. That's all.
The best in the short term we're talking about here. Yes, as in like you get an LEC offer, but it's your only LEC offer, so you take it thinking, well, fuck, it's my chance to make it. Whereas if you listen to this conversation and the section about special earlier, that can actually be the poison chalice. Like in that scenario, you might have been better off doing the one more split in ERL where maybe you can even look even better. And then maybe you get 3 offers and one of them's for a better place where you'll actually be treated the way you should be.
I mean, this is the reality of the situation. Like obviously Peter is gonna present himself as the exception to this, and Peter has actually made like leeway in this regard before, but the pressures in the market are always going to be in favor of the orgs not just letting you freely go to whatever team you want if you perform well in your academy. They're not necessarily incentivized to promote you over that. Like, it's not necessarily full performance based, and you have to consider if you put yourself on an academy team for these orgs, they will demand a premium that lower teams aren't necessarily pressured in doing so.
I mean,
right?
I mean, there's an argument to be said that like if Mad Lions had somebody in our academy team who suddenly went and played LEC, that would be a good advertisement for more people to come to Mad Lions in the future, right? So it can go both ways, right? So I'm not just going to say that that it's locked in this way, but what I will say is that this is why I'm really hesitant, because the whole idea, like EU Masters, is being shown as this tournament. You know, it's the next people who are coming into LEC, right? It's the next set of talents, right? And I'm scared with how right now that people who needed time to develop and time to build up their career, like not everybody can be a Kazi or a Kaiser or like, let's pick somebody else, like a self-made, right? Who comes in and they like immediately look insane and they immediately like smash the league, right? Some people need some time to develop and build up their sort of experience over their careers, right? And if every single 3 months we're having recycle this guy, kick schemes for Tink. Sorry, I really like Tink, right? So I really like. I think Tink is an insane player, right? But kick schemes for like the next really promising guy, okay? Or kick somebody else for the next promising guy after 3 months, right? Like that doesn't feel right to me, right? Like it's like when we're looking at players to recruit for Mad Lions, like I've said this before, Kaiser is the only guy who we've been following for less than a year. We've been following Kaiser for 1 year. We've been following Kazi, Shadow, and Arome for 2+ years, right? Right? Yep. And if people fall into this trap of always think, we can just get anybody, just get the new guy, get the new hotness, then a lot of people might not get the chance to show their true potential, and that would be sad. That's what I would say.
I will partly agree with you there, but I will say that it's almost by necessity now that you will have people pushing for that more than before, because you don't have promotion relegation in. How else are these guys going to get in that deserve it? And if you have a really good setup right now to get into the top 4 in EU Masters, like last split, and you have an insane performance like that, and you don't have that insane roster for the next EU Masters split, and you're just not, your name isn't there, you've lost your chance. God knows for how long. This isn't the first time Tinks has performed like this. Tinks performed like this in 2018, and yet this is going to be the first EU Masters people who heard of him, even though he's been an EU Masters MVP before. Like it's So I will also add that I am very critical to say I want to see this guy in like a major ERL team. I want to see this guy have another split, but otherwise I'm sorry for him in the next year. I don't immediately say all these guys should go LEC, right?
I mean, what I would say is from this EU Masters, there were 8 to 9 people on my future to watch list, and neither of those players was Xinged or Tinks, because they're like obviously elite. Like everyone can see that Tinks and Xinged.
They're obvious to you. They'll be surprised how many people with power it's not obvious to. If they're not, imagine that they're not there next split. Guarantee they're forgotten, because this has already happened with Tinks. This is just already happened.
It has happened. Like, I mean, I don't know what to say about this, but like, if I was somebody who wanted to prove myself, heck, if I was Destiny, no, not Destiny, but like an Oceania player, right? And I wanted to come and prove myself somewhere, I would try to go to the ERLs. Now, like, I think Europe has the best sort of talent development potential in Europe for a coach or a player. And if you want to prove yourself, this is where you prove yourself to people, right? So I think, sorry, I don't know why I went on that tangent. It was just a random tangent. But anyway, but what we have here in Europe is something very, very special, which, which we should guard. We should be grateful we have, right? But we have to be careful that we treat it for what it is, right? Like, it's a good place to prove your talent, but you have people have to do their jobs first as well, and not just always go for the new hotness, right? Because right now China went through a similar situation, right, where Zero and Insec were the 2 imports into China in season 4, right? And then Starhorn World Club did really well, right? So lots of other teams just immediately imported tons of Koreans, and half these Koreans didn't do anything, right? Like there's a problem. There's a risk in Europe that at some point we come into the situation where tons of rookies just come into the league all the time, without giving people who are established the chance to prove themselves. And I think that there are people who were in LEC, who deserve to be in LEC still, who were
I'm not worried about that because there's always going to be the counterweight of the fact that the established people will have pre-established brand recognition, so GMs are going to be less likely to even want to give this guy up, right? They're like, and this is a problem that teams have actually fallen into when it's come to trying to place an objectively bad player in their spot, but that guy is just too valuable to the org in general, right? Like everyone's immediately thought of examples over in NA, but these examples do exist in E as well. There are going to be people in the comments who will incorrectly assume NateDOhDoubleG is one of those guys, but maybe you could say that might be why his pay is so high, right? But like this is the counterweight to it, and this is also what the rookies are fighting against. And I'm far more worried that counterweight is actually too strong right now because of lack of permission.
That's fine. Like it's possible. Like I'm coming from the rookies are awesome position, right? Like I think rookies are awesome, right? Obviously, we signed a ton of rookies. Obviously, we think our rookies are awesome, right? But I always have to like check myself all the time, right? From going too far in that direction. So maybe I don't know that much about. Right? I've only worked for Splice Mad Lions in Europe, so I don't know how thinking is done in other orgs. But I know that. But from my perspective, I always find myself always having to check myself on these sorts of things. But maybe you're right. Like I don't know enough from how.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a little something to say on this topic, which is I think like just to make this very clearly emphasized, the disconnect is this. The way you know these teams are not scouting these players extensively, like Peter's talking about here, following them for a year, watching every game of them, is that they think it's a lottery ticket, not a player that they know is good and are trying to transition in their team. And their behavior is what shows you that. Because if they give up on one of these players after a single split and then basically say, just get another lottery ticket, that tells you all they were doing was praying that this player becomes a humanoid, a self-made. These players that come in and are instantly among the best. Now, the chances of that are very low no matter who these players are. It's going to be way more in the minority that the rookie does that, including, by the way, the rookie you're now taking another gamble on. So the point is, where you're going to see the shrewd GMs are the ones who look at, it could be a steelback, a leader, someone who has had moments or flashes of potential, but also had reasons why people looked the other way and didn't consider them. And that's where you're actually going to make a killing. If you're the person who says, everyone else has given up on this guy, but I'm actually going to bring him in. I think that he's this close to being the player I want, basically. So the idea that there's just going to be this turnover of rookies, you can see it is happening. It has become a thing, but it has to be avoided because it will just become its own madness, essentially.
Actually, that is an insane. Like, Thorin, I'm literally stealing that metaphor to use whenever I want to describe my feelings about this because that's exactly how I feel about this. And frankly, I'm going to be as honest as I possibly can about this. Kazi or Arome or Kaiser or Shadow could have literally gone 0-4 like for the entirety or like half of the season, right? And they would still be getting a second split, right? There was no question about this, right? Because you have to believe that your 2 years of scouting is going to be better than like 2 months of play, right? Yes. Now maybe things could have gone really badly wrong if but like give people the chance to show their talent in 100%. Fair situations, especially if they've been brought in under things have gone wrong in the roster or they've been brought in like 6 weeks into a split or something like this. Just give them a fair chance. That's
when it comes to like one split long players, like I 100% agree with you there. Like I went really ham about the difference between how Misfits treated their rookies that they only gave half a split versus how Rogue treated the rookies they gave a full split to, right? Like I fully agree with you on this.
Right, there's one last team to discuss. I mean, as Peter said at the beginning, I think it was him, was that 6 teams were making changes. Obviously, one of them is G2, just with a roll swap. The other team is obviously SK. Not SK, Schalke. Now, Schalke, as Veteran alluded to before, there was the rumour Mystique. So, John, generally it's bot lane rumours for this one. So the other one is that they put Neon into the main team. Obviously was in SK last year. By the way, another player on that list. There's a lot of GMs out there, as far as I can tell, where if I ask you and you're the GM of an LEC team, who is Neon? And you go, isn't he that guy who played like a couple of games and misbought an item and SK was bad? It's like, you should be fired. You should be fired the second that sentence ends. Because if you just say, well, I just didn't want him for these reasons, I don't think it's that good. But there's the player where there's clearly some signs of potential with that player. So thoughts if this was to happen, hypothetical right now, obviously we have no confirmation.
I'm a big fan of Neon.
Yeah, same. Neon automatically became the best AD carry that they had on the roster when he joined, including the F guy that we no longer really talk about anymore. But like he actually is a phenomenal laner. Schalke were previously, before he joined it, a team that had incredibly strong team-based fundamentals. I'm talking about the academy team, by the way. That's the team that he joined. Had incredibly strong team-based fundamentals. They never really had like standout S-tier players, but Neon is just so absurdly consistent.
Oh yeah, by the way, apologies. It was obviously Misfits. He was on, not SK. I just realised I said it was SK for some.
Oh yeah, Neon. Yeah, sure.
No, Neon was on. Yeah, Neon was on that Misfits roster where he misbought an item. But he's an absurdly consistent laner. He's absurdly consistent out of lane. This has been the case of him for a long time. Like I remember when it was Crowny versus Jeskler versus Neon in the ERLs when Neon was on Millennium. Jeskler was on. Was it Movistar? I believe it was Movistar, right?
I think so, right?
It was a blue Spanish team, Peter. You know all this better than me. Do you remember the names?
Jeskler
was on Movi. Yeah, he was on Movistar. And Crowny was on LDLC at the time. I had Crowny as like the best, but I had Neon as the best laner for sure. Laning has always been like a really big deal for Neon.
You mean Crownshot was on Mad Lions?
Mad Lions.
Crownshot was on. Oh yeah, it was Mad Lions. Yeah, it was Mad Lions. There was a time where they overlapped, where he was on LDLC and Neon was on. But in that whole season where those three were like the creme de la creme, Neon was the best at laning for sure. Crowny was like the best overall, and it got to the point where they were almost dependent on whether or not Crowny was carrying or not, which says a lot when both Selfie and Nemesis was on that team. But Neon was always just the standout best laner there, and that has continued. Like he should not be in the ERLs. It's very obvious when he plays against any other AD carry or bot lane there, including Jeskler, who's just come from an LEC tenure. Like it's maybe you disagree on that, but just because Jeskler gets Callista 6 games in a row doesn't fucking mean that he's a better laner than Neon.
Jeskler's Ziggs is really insane.
Oh wow, yeah, wow, yeah, Ziggs Callista, wow, Ziggs Callista winning lane. I'm fucking mind blown. But Neon wouldn't die in lane, and Neon would use his all-in potential at 6 and just stomp these guys from there on out. Neon played every lane perfectly well. He denied win conditions to the enemy, and he always played for his really fucking way. He's not the lane dominant in the same way that like Forgiven is, where he insists on having just lane dominant champions, right? And pushing 24/7. He plays out the laning phase on weak pre-6 champions in weak pre-6 matchups very fucking well, and then just goes ham after that. Like this guy shouldn't be in the ERLs. He's far too complete of an AD carry. And yeah, I would love to see him move up. I do like that they gave Inax a shot. Right, but I think that if we say that Inax is like the best pick for them, if they're choosing which one of these two will be in the LEC or the academy, I think we can agree that might be going like a bit too far in support there. I think they should retain Inax for academy, right?
Depends how they want to use Odo.
That's while that is true, the reason why I was sure to bring up that Jeskler played like Callista versus him 3 games in a row is because he is essentially, he's showing that he can play without jungle attention, without a lane dominant pick on bot, without having to be going for resources from level 1 onwards. So I think Neon is actually very, very malleable in that sense. He has a very strong understanding of laning phase in that regard. This guy made Sir Nukes-a-Lot look like a fucking god on fresh. Like how fucking insane can you be if you're able to do that, you know? They have 2 good AD carries. There's a lot of potential in Inax, but I think it's absurd to me that Neon is in the ERLs. Just absurd.
I mean, like also Odo, right? Like we've had this discussion before, but
I think Odo's S tier. I think Odo's S tier. So yeah.
So I mean, what I would say about Odo is something I've never understood since I've come to Europe. Because I mean, I coached Odo 2 years ago, and Odo propagates this himself, and Odo has always said, I am Mr. Weakside. I'm going to play Maokai for you. I'm going to be a dog, and I'm going to play Maokai for you. Woof woof, you know. And like Odo, when I was on Splice, like the Odo that I worked with was a really good strong side player. You give him a lead, he will just shot call. He will micromanage 4 people victory. Like his performances at Worlds when H2K got to the semifinals of Worlds, he was on Rumble and Jace every game.
Yes,
and like
his Jace was so good though.
Yeah. And this guy, for some reason in Europe, everyone thinks he's like a weak side. Like he had to play.
I think he's a Maokai main, basically.
He had to play weak side for Kobe 1 year, and then he's in Schalke the next year, play weak side for Upset. And this year, like people say, "Oh wow, Odo suddenly have a renaissance in his career, and he's going to be like, where did this Odo come from?" And it's literally the same guy who's been top 60 in the ladder, who's always playing strong side this year and looking great. And to be honest, on Splice, the reason why we let him move on is because we needed a weak side player, and Odo was not Chachi is a really good weak side player. Odo is a really good strong side player, and I'm glad that Schalke have put him in that role this year. Now that Upset's no longer in the team, so he does look insane this year. That's all I would say.
I mean, the most painful parts of Odo on the Upset roster were when he was like, I will never forget that Cannon game. Like, this is probably the fourth time I brought it up on that show, but that Cannon game is 8-0, and they're still just like obsessively playing around Upset and Ignor no matter what. And Ignor's obviously playing on Upset. Like, it's insane.
But why does I mean, Thorin, I know that you know Odo very well. Like, why does Odo insist on being being Mr. Weak Side?
I'm with you, because this is the weirdest thing about it. It's one thing if the team does that to you, or for example, you just have these players like Upset Forgiven who are just going to essentially demand their play around, and if they have, more of a bold voice than you, maybe it just goes that way. But I agree. Basically, he's an example of someone where the only limitations I can see on his game come from his own mind. Like, he just, for some reason, he's taken pride in the fact that he's this weak side player. And it's almost like, here's the thing, I have had times where I've even got him on shows to say, I think maybe this year I will be the carry player or whatever. But it feels like, as bizarre as it sounds, his comfort is to revert back to that. I don't know if it's some angle like, it's a different type of praise to get when people think you're playing what should be like a weaker role, but then you excel at it. That's one way to do it, whereas you get a lot of the blame if you are the carry player. I don't know if there's some of that involved, but I agree. It's always been a very weird idiosyncrasy, because to me, I really thought, no joke, up until the team when he finished playing with Forgiven, I thought when Forgiven went out of the team and they brought that Korean bot lane in, this is where he's just going to say to Prolly and the rest of them, listen, I did that shit for years and years while we had those teams that ran through the team, but it's my time now. Like, I'm the fucking carry player, loaded up, I've got Featherven as my mate, let's just make it a solo. And as far as I can tell, he didn't do that. Like, he was, again, unduly willing to be this guy who is sacrificing the team. Unfortunately, that's why I always, if you notice, people think I love toxic players because I don't deny a player who is the best player his right to demand resources. I don't think that I think basically the problem is this. Most players, as a general trend, are naturally too selfish. And so as a result, all the coaching patois, all the things that the coaches say revolve lots of comments of, there's no I in team, play for your teammates, a great teammate's the one that makes the other players better. And we say that because most people naturally tend towards essentially a kind of narcissism and selfishness. So we're just trying to bring those guys more within line. The problem is, in my opinion, people like Odo, I think even Soaz suffered from this in his career, they get it in their heads that being a good teammate is being the first one to say, I'll give up, I'll sacrifice for you. Whereas sometimes, and this is what I always told the guys who were the carry players, sometimes you should demand things. It's just that when you demand them, then you have the responsibility that you then must carry. You can't demand it and then tell me that the other guy on your team had a shit score. Yeah, he's setting you up, you idiot. His score's represented on your part of the scoreboard. So I'm with you. I've always found that very weird. I always wish you could break Odo out of that, because in a couple of his last few teams, it hasn't been applicable, in my opinion. They would have been a better team if he'd have had this mentality.
I mean, to be clear, this is like a failing on my part as well, right? Like, Odo was my player and once, and we were 9-1 on Camille or 8-1 on Camille or something. Like, we barely lost the game when he played Camille. But in playoff situations, other people were always much more vocal, and I kind of wish I'd given him more opportunities to be on carries back in the day. But anyway, past is past. But yeah.
I mean, he does this to himself, though, Peter. Like, he does do this to himself. Like, I remember at that World Championship of HUK, even outwardly, when Reapered and who was the Rocks Tigers coach at the time? I can't remember his name right now. Was it? Yeah, wait, was it Song at the time?
No Faye.
No.
I've just said it.
Oh, it's No Faye.
Oh, yeah, it was No Faye. Yeah.
Wow,
yes, fuck me. Actually, wait, I fucking love No Faye, actually. But No Faye and Reaper did that dual interview, and the only Western player that they mentioned was Odo, because Odo was just reaming them in scrims on Jace, etc. They said that their top laners were demanding, which at the time was Smeb and Impact, were demanding to play against Odo specifically because they could learn from him, right? But he's had all of this praise from not just that, but also I've seen him personally get praised by people like Smeb, like face to face. Like, these guys have massive respect for him as a strong side player, but he insists on this characterization.
Actually, I just realized I shouldn't be saying this. No, you should go weak side. Put him weak side. Like, go play mid to bottom.
True. But I mean, you don't have to say that, Pete. Like, we can praise him all we want, and then he'll still lock himself into it. He does it to himself, is my point, right? Like, that's so much praise.
I think a tragedy is that he didn't receive more like not MVP, but like LEC first, second, third team. Like, I think that he should have got.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I put him on my one, but I thought he was an S tier player the whole split. This guy's absurdly impressive, and I hope he does more. But I also know that I will see him on Maokai again. So whatever.
Can we talk about what? Can I just raise one final topic that I'm kind of interested in? So whilst we're talking about players, segue. Once we're talking about sort of narratives, right, that have built up around players. One thing that bothers me, and I'm interested to hear your points of view on this, is why has there been a narrative that going online benefited Mad Lions moving into the end of the season in playoffs? And I'll just say my side before I ask. And the reason I ask this is because, from my perspective, when I look at Mad Lions and I look at the players who are on Mad Lions, playing in front of 200 people, playing in front of 50,000 people, you don't get preparation for, but that's only the top 3 who do that, right? But there were a lot of people who were saying, there's no pressure with playing on stage and that kind of thing. And therefore that benefits rookies. But if you look at the players sort of that Mad Lions have, Kazi, Kaiser have always been players who were big game performance. Maybe you could argue, Kaiser when he was Gistic, before he renamed, maybe you could argue that Gistic maybe didn't take regular season games as seriously as he maybe should have. But he was always like a major stage player. Kazi was always a major stage player. Humanoid was a major stage player. And Shadow and Arome.
Here we go.
Never performed badly on stage, right? But they were never. There's a big difference between somebody like Kaiser, who is always like, if it's not playoffs, like I don't really give a damn. That sounds a bit mean to Kaiser, but versus somebody like Shadow and Rome, who never dropped, right? When they were playing in playoffs, like Shadow had good performance in playoffs, so Rome was playing when he was in teams that played strong side was a solid carry. When he was on teams that played weak side, weak side, you just survive as best as you can. And like when I look at this thing going into next season, like I agree that there's a lot of things that Mad Lions have to overcome. We have to show that as a rookie team, we can develop our strategy and play different styles to what we've been playing. But when the LEC went online, we lost Profi, which is a big, that really hurts rookie teams compared to more experienced teams. And we have all of these players who...
What was the reason you lost Profi, by the way?
Because when the games were online, they couldn't show pro view. I don't really understand, but basically
it was only if it was a LAN game.
So legally, they were only licensed to install the ProView software because it's actually outsourced to a third-party company. They were only licensed to install that on Riot computers, and the computers that they play from home aren't Riot computers, so they couldn't install the software.
Do you want to know a piece of trivia you don't know, Veteran?
Hit me.
I actually own stock in that company.
Really? Okay.
Stock on these nuts.
So why the fuck are you asking them for? You should be explaining.
No, doesn't mean I know everything about the day-to-day business, man.
All I say is that software is insane. Go for that. Go for
not
that.
Bad.
Use that.
Not
use
bad,
that
right?
more.
I'll just say that as a disclaimer because if I big it up at all, I should reference that for the sake of journalistic integrity. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
Okay, but this is something where obviously like you are people who are outside. Like we're in a bubble, right? Like in every LEC team, you are in a bubble, right? It's just natural. Because there's stuff you can share, there's stuff that you can't share.
Yeah, one thing you know more about the scrims and everything that we don't know. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. But I mean, I'm not going to call scrims, right? Like, because we have evidence, like that's unbalanced information, right? But just on the information that was already out there, why is this such a narrative? Because it's always really, really puzzled me. And maybe Veteran, maybe Thorin, you can help me shine some light on this because I just don't understand it.
I'll go quick because I'm pretty sure Thorin has very strong opinions on this, judging by how he's talked about like CSGO online stuff, at least from the tweets that I've seen. I don't understand CSGO, but like from my perspective, I will say that the narrative itself shouldn't matter as much in Europe, where we have such a vast scene where not just playoff games, by the way, but a lot of regular season games actually get played on LAN at an amateur level before these guys ever reach LEC. They have years of experience at a LAN level before they ever reach LEC now. which doesn't exist in North America. Does still exist in China, as far as I know. Doesn't actually really exist in Korea, as far as I know, not to the same extent as it does here, but China does have the city system, right? So I will say that this narrative shouldn't be as big of a factor, because the LAN experience thing is actually a really big meme. And before COVID-19, like there wasn't a lack of LAN events for rookie talent.
Well, first of all, I will acknowledge one point you make there, which wasn't considered by almost anyone who made that narrative, is that you're correct. Since you played them in the upset in the first round of the playoffs, that wouldn't have been in a road show in front of 10,000 fans. So you're right. That wouldn't be like the same as if you played them in the upper bracket final and then it was a massive game. Yeah, I agree. I'm with you on that one. It would be less of an issue. But I would just say that for me, there's a competitive ladder you have to climb, and there are very few people who skip steps on the ladder. So even if Veteran's saying there, you know, in the ERLs, you can play them on LAN, that's a different type of a LAN setting. And it doesn't matter that to you, it's the biggest game of your life to play the LFL final. That isn't the same as when the same person who wins that and looks clutch on that relative level, when he then goes and plays a massive playoff game in the LEC, as far as I'm concerned, he starts over as a rookie again. Like, maybe he turns out to be the rare individual who is just a big game player from level to level to level on the rungs of the ladder, as it were, in my analogy. They're very rare. Like, that is like, we're talking like Perks and like 2 other people probably ever. Like, most people, they start out, they're not playoff material, then they're in the playoffs, then they go out early, then they have to figure, you know, there's really, it's a mixture of experience and figuring out where your head's at and how to, sometimes even how to play differently. How do you play when everything in your individual game's going to shit? If you play the same way as normal, you're going to lose. You see the G2 players do this all the time. They adapt in a game to find a solution that clearly wasn't what they went into the game with. I'd also say it's not necessarily as much a diss to the rookies here, as in, it's not that I think the rookie gets better. I'm not calling them an onliner in that sense.
Okay.
But it takes away, to me, a key edge that the veteran and especially a champion has. Like, think about any dominant champion in history. SK Telecom, Fnatic back in the day with Xpeke and Soaz, now the G2 players. An edge they have in a LAN playoff setting is they can actually use that very fact against the opponent. As in, they can literally play even more risky. They can do moves that actually are otherwise like low expected value moves on the basis that someone will tighten up in a playoff scenario. A rookie might not be willing to make a play that he would in a scrim in a regular season game. They can take advantage of those gaps. It's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why really dominant teams are so dominant. It's not just that they're the best or they have the most effective prevailing style. It's that they also then get like an aura around them that seems to impact other people. Other people then start buying into these narratives, start thinking they're overhyping them, thinking they're better than they are. And you get people who lose a game and at the end of it, they almost say, fuck, if I'd have just played like it was a normal team I was playing, I actually would have won that game. But when I was playing it in my brain, I kept thinking, basically, if anyone ever remembers the classic StarCraft 2 player, Idra, this is what he did all the time. He literally lost some games he was winning in because in his brain, the other player was better. Therefore, that other player would have played out any advantage perfectly and never lost the game. He couldn't ever allow the opponent to make a mistake, even though he understood he himself made mistakes. So with that's obviously a lot of that's like, it's not specific to your team there. I'm not specifically saying Mad Lions, but I do think generally, I put it this way, I would be extremely impressed if they could have had the same result in the LAN setting in the normal playoff situation there.
I feel
aside from that,
basically, I feel Mad Lions were kind of, when we heard that things were going on online, like it was really weird seeing not your show, but seeing like a lot of narrative being about this, because we were distraught when we heard that the thing was going online. Like we were really, as a coaching staff, we were really sad.
I mean, you should want them to get that, be blooded in a LAN setting. Yeah, of course.
But obviously, like I feel that, and here I don't want to complain about narrative, right? Like it's our job next season to set the scene right? You know, like this the Origen Mad Lions. Like if Summer Split does not have an Origen Mad Lions best of 5, like I will be really, really sad. Unless like one of us is 10th place, in which case,
sure,
okay, then you don't need. But like that is the real like slam down, like prove yourself, right? That's the one that I'm looking for in summer. Besides the revenge on G2, but like but yeah, like I feel that a kind of a lot of the achievements that a lot of people got were a bit cheapened by going online, and that's not just for G2 winning, but it's also for other teams that perform better. There's always an asterisk,
Sure.
and from somebody who has an asterisk next to their achievement, I just highlight the other side of the coin, I guess, is also yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to hone in on something very specific, like Thorin was talking about, because that's honestly how like dynasties get created. Like, this is the unspoken thing about it, because a lot of people will decide that you can't quantify this sort of thing and you can't know this sort of thing, and it's too many assumptions. But what Thorin is saying is absolutely right, and something that I've seen a lot, and I saw specifically with regards to the attitude that teams had versus Koreans. Even if they had like a lot of hope at the start, if they just drop one game, they're like, oh yeah, these guys are just impossible. Whatever were we going to do? This is what the prevailing sentiment among European players was back in the day, and a lot of people now, especially players who started playing in the last 2 to 3 years, has no clue what that was like. That was the most infuriating aspects of the scene to me, because I like this is going to seem like a really weird defense of a tweet that I made when Worlds was happening, but for me, it didn't matter if G2 won Worlds so long as they rolled over both the Korean teams in the best of fives, and when they beat SKT the second time in that year, much harder than they did the first time. That was just it for me. Like, at that point, I didn't care if they beat FPX or not, because there isn't a mental block for Europeans. There never has been. No, I need to finish this. Like, it's like there's no doubt right now in the heads of all of these big rookies that we are talking about that they can go all the way. There's no doubt in their heads anymore. That's not because G2 were close to winning Worlds, but it's because the only big mental block that I've seen teams fall to in the past, you very often, if you go back and you look at all of these EU versus Korea games, unlike the NA v Korea ones where they look close in the first game, like the Koreans do take the first game and stuff seriously, they are incredibly close games, and then one thing will go wrong and it will cascade in a way that it hasn't cascaded in any other game that those EU guys play. And so much of that did end up coming down to a mental block, and that's just being removed. And the new generation coming up, because of what G2 ended up doing last year, does not have that in them. They 100% believe that they can go all the way. There's no doubt in their heads that they can go all the way. And this is something that is almost taboo to talk about now, because for some weird reason we have it that if it's not something that you can tangibly talk about in game, then it's useless to bring up. But this is such a massive fucking deal, and it really is. I can understand why people would think that Madline's rookies going up against G2, because they don't know the personality of your players, Peter. But I can understand why they would think that they would just shit themselves if they looked across the stage and saw G2 were there in a playoff game, right?
This is the hilarious thing about the G2, because I think that what you say is right, of course. But the more you beat the Koreans and the more you challenge I mean, G2 have beaten Chinese teams, right? But the more G2 beat teams from other regions, the less impressive it gets that they've beaten all these teams from other regions, right? Which means that
but that's good. That's good.
But that means that the people coming up, maybe you're right about this mental block being removed. Again, I've only been in Europe for 2.5 years now, so I don't know what it was like back in the old days when like Gamsu was being recruited into Europe. But what I will say is that the rookies believe that they could beat the foreign teams, but they also believe that they could beat G2. And I guess G2.
Well, here's the thing, Peter. It's become a kind of big deal in the last 2 years that we know that rookies have denied very big contracts from North American teams, right? Why? Yes. Because if they can beat G2, they can do literally anything. If you are the best in Europe, you can be the best in the world. Why would they leave it? That mentality that the Koreans had for so long now exists in Europe, and it doesn't exist because Europe won Worlds. Europe didn't have to win Worlds here. They had to remove that massive mental block that has existed across so many esports and be propagated by so many fucking people for their own benefits as a fucking safe bet. That, you know, like that was the biggest thing G2 could have done. Like, after the semi-finals were done, the tournament was done for me. That's all that had to be done, and that's the gift that they have given.
Also, I mean, to that as well, Veteran, forget just rookies. The rookies are the ones they're the symptom. They show you that the EU scene is healthy. The players I also want to thank right now, literally thank, is Perks and Caps. If these two guys parlayed their best years in Europe into enormous contracts for Cloud9 and TSM and Team Liquid, that would then make these same rookies think, well, that's what I do when I get my good year. Exactly. I just immediately... Whereas instead what they see now is, well, fuck, if Perks and Caps aren't going to do it, I'll stay here and play those guys. If NA is not good enough for them, it ain't good enough for me. In fact, now you'll get a lot of rookies who'll tell you privately, I'll go there, but I'll wait till I know like my main chances in Europe are gone. Like I'll go there when I'm starting on the downcline.
Yes.
That's I mean, yeah, it's fair. I mean, as
having these role models is important, right? Like that's the thing.
Even as a coach for another team, like you have to acknowledge, like to be fair, like you have to, but not respect them too much, if that makes sense. Like
I think you cut out there. Did you say you have to fear them but not respect them too much or something? Or
yeah, no, like respect what they did in the past.
Yeah,
and go fight them to the death over stuff.
Yes, 100%. Don't replace one mental block with another one, right? Like, don't replace one with another. But these guys haven't done that. Like, these guys haven't done that. They don't view G2 as like completely unbeatable. You went some of the way to prove that they can bleed, right? You went some of the way to prove that.
But I mean, but this is this for me. That this was something that was interesting because. Okay, I think the EU casters are good. Okay, full stop. Like I think. Really good.
Okay, here we go.
Oh boy.
Okay? But like this thing that like beating G2 is this insane thing is to me felt a little bit overblown because to me it's just the best of 5 and like I mean like so what we beat G2 3-2 but we lost to them 2 weeks later. That's not a good thing. Right? That's a bad thing. It means that we improved less than G2 did in 2 weeks, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's bad. That's really bad. So when I look back on the season, like obviously I'm happy we won a best of 5, but I'm not specifically happy that we won a best of 5 against G2. I'm happy that we won a best of 5 such that if the tournament had been happening in Hungary, we could have been on stage in Hungary, right?
Yes.
But sorry, I'm getting a little bit of. I'm just remembering my players coming back, like laughing like psychopaths after we lost Game 4 against G2. Oh, the rage is building again. But never mind. Sorry. Yeah, Game 4, the one that we threw. But I think that's worth saying. Yeah. So
you prefer them to be laughing like psychopaths to silence.
I mean, I would prefer them not to throw the game because they think it's funny.
Well, obviously, yes,
but I mean, like, I wonder whether there's so because we talked a lot about narrative, whether this narrative was overpushed, right? Like because it's seen as such a big thing, right? Like
sure.
to beat G2, who were the team that finally overcame these Koreans, who beat. Okay, they didn't beat FPX, but they did beat RNG when they were not very good. When G2 were not very good, you know, these Korean killers, these Chinese, you know,
sure.
the team that can beat all these Asian teams. Like, sure, I mean, good, okay, but I mean, we have to go into next season and do it all over again. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So, that is the narrative that's always bothered me. But yeah, no, thank you for answering that question because I from somebody inside my bubble, I could never really understand it. So
this video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Emanuel Särnbratt, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, the Puyallup Tribe, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Maybe ask a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on my next content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those donated discussions with me where we go really deep into the weeds. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the description box link below.